Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of Deep Space Wine. I'm Kat, a relative newcomer to the world of Star Trek, and I'm gradually making my way through Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time, as I prepare for each episode of this podcast. And I'm joined by Tim, who's loved Star Trek for many years and brings his deep appreciation and knowledge of the show. Tonight's episode is focused on Battle Lines, which is the 12th or 13th, if you count M3 as 2 episodes, which we don't, episode of Deep Space Nine, which aired on syndicated television on the 26th of April, 1993. Just the content warn, what turns up in this episode of Deep Space Nine and in our conversation tonight. There is serious injury and death due to a shuttle accident. There's injury and death due to gunfire, a character acting with the awareness that they are about to die, and there is a topic of unending war. And on that subject, although this episode deals with a depiction of war, we won't at any point be comparing that fictional war with any real human wars, past or present. As we'll discuss later in this episode, the nature of the conflict in this story has a supernatural element to it which distinguishes and distances it from any real war that's ever been waged. And I don't think the writers intended it to be a direct analogy for any given conflict. So we'll talk about what the episode is saying for the characters involved, but it wouldn't be relevant or appropriate for us to talk about real battles where real people have died or are dying in the context of a sci-fi TV show, so we will not be doing that. I will now pass over to Tim for a plot summary of the episode. Take it away, Tim.
Thank you very much, Kat. Good evening, everyone, and thanks, as always, for tuning in. So, this is indeed episode 12 or 13 of Deep Space Nine Season 1, and the plot summary hereby sourced from Wikipedia. Thank you, as always, to this anonymous Wikipedia contributor. I will now whiz through for everyone's benefit. Kai Opaka, the spiritual leader of the Bajorans, requests a tour of Deep Space Nine from Commander Sisko. During the tour, she subtly asks him to take her through the wormhole. Against his better judgment, he complies, and he, Dr. Bashir, Bajoran Liaison Officer Kira, and Kai Opaka travel to the Gamma Quadrant. There they receive a distress signal from an unknown source. Opaka tells Sisko not to hold back on her account, so the group go to investigate. They find a moon with a network of satellites, one of which is malfunctioning. The runabout approaches the moon, and one of the satellites attacks it, forcing them to crash land. Opaka dies in the landing, which devastates Kira. However, her morning is interrupted by a group of people called the Ennis, led by Golin Shelah, played by recognisable actor Jonathan Banks. The Ennis explain that they are at war with a group called the Null Ennis, who could attack at any minute. They take Sisko, Bashir, and Kira to a cave-like dwelling, and as predicted, the Null Ennis attack within minutes. Many of the Ennis are killed fending off the attack, but after the battle, Kai Opaka enters the cave, resuscitated by some form of nanotechnology that pervades the moon. The same technology revives the Ennis and Null Ennis, but rather than a blessing, it is a curse. Both groups were sent to the moon as punishment for centuries of conflict, doomed to die over and over. As DS9 officers Dax and O'Brien search for the group, Sisko gets the Ennis and Null Ennis to agree to meet in an effort to negotiate peace. Meanwhile, the conflict between the groups reminds Kira of her own trauma, which she discusses with Opaka. Years of fighting the Cardassians on Bajor have taken their toll on her, and she has known nothing but violence since she was a child. However, while Kira is reconciling her problems, the Ennis and Null Ennis refuse to fix theirs and resume fighting. The groups are revived once more and return to their respective camps, but by this time Bashir has discovered that the technology prevents those it revives, including Opaka, from leaving the moon. O'Brien and Dax find Sisko, and Opaka informs him that she will stay with the Ennis and Null Ennis. She says it is time for them to begin their healing process, just as Kira has begun hers. Meanwhile, the Ennis and Null Ennis resume fighting. Before O'Brien transports Sisko, Bashir, and Kira to the runabout, Opaka tells Sisko that her work is there now, but reassures him that their paths will cross again. Thus concludes the episode summary.
Woohoo! Thank you, Wikipedia and Tim.
Thank you, Wikipedia, indeed. So what we normally do is we normally go through it in a scene-by-scene kind of rundown from beginning to start, kind of sharing our feelings as we go along. But I guess any headline top feelings, Kat, you want to give us? Gut instinct reaction?
I think it feels like a very classic Star Trek episode. You've got two sides at war with each other. The war is futile. Oh no! People from the Federation recognise that the war is futile, but aren't able to change it because partly prime directive, partly in this case technological interference.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's entertaining. It bobs along at a fair rate. I think it's a little odd that we've got Kai Opaka and she never mentions anything about the emissary or the orbs or anything she's previously talked to Cisco about in the first episode. It's just, oh, this is Kai Opaka. She's important. And they don't share anything else.
Yeah. My own feeling on this was, I get that you're trying to say that this is significant and this involves an important character, but it would have had more importance if she'd turned up anywhere between the first episode and now. This is the first time we've seen her since she was first introduced.
Well, just if she greeted Cisco as hello emissary, something that hinted at the importance of this man to her and her people, but there's nothing there. She's just a high priest of her people, and we don't know what else. It's very odd. It does feel like a script separate from the main storyline of Deep Space Nine.
Which is weird because they've worked really hard previously to kind of remind us of this culture, Bajoran culture, the reason Starfleet's here, while the station's there, you know, Kira's background. Yeah. And they just seem to have just sent it on me like, oh, you recognise this character. She was in the first episode. Care about her. And I'm like...
I think they do well at tying the importance of Kai Opaka to Kira.
Yes,
they do focus on that quite a bit.
That is true.
But yeah, it does just feel very peculiar, and particularly since this episode feels like a trapdoor for setting Opaka aside for a while to potentially pick her up again in the future, which obviously I don't know if we do or not. I don't know whether this character will come back. No spoilers. But yes, that struck me as odd. But otherwise, yeah, it's a very serviceable and entertaining Star Trek episode, and it does treat the characters reasonably well. The dialogue reflects who they are and what their histories are.
Yes, I agree.
Unlike the last episode, which was garbage.
Was exactly what I was going to come in with next, was that this is hopefully a bit of a palate cleanser following Vortex, which we both came away from not enjoying, it's safe to say.
Yeah. It's a shame. I like Odo a great deal, but it was just not a great Star Trek episode.
I would 100% agree with you.
And I think this week they've actually given... what's his name, Rene Aubergenois, a week off because he's not in this episode very much. He had a lot to do last time. This time he popped up a couple of times in the background.
Yes, and I think that is something that you will realise the show does, is it pans around and one or maybe two characters will get a focus and the rest will be relegated to more supporting roles. And certain characters do not appear, I believe, from the background. That Quark and Jake do not turn up at all in this episode.
No, that's true. There's absolutely no sequences set in the bar, which is quite unusual.
For DS9, yes. Not going to the bar is unusual. DS9, do we need to have an intervention? The amount of time you spend in the bar.
How did we come up with the title of this podcast again?
I couldn't possibly say.
So, first scene, we open in Ops where Miles, Cisco and Dax have found an old file of Kira's from when Terok Nor was still under Cardassian rule. And Miles and Dax say that the encryption system was actually very easy to break, as if they wanted us to find the files, or they just didn't care. And Cisco remarks that they're not of strategic value, but it is a glimpse into the Cardassian mind. Miles says we might want to warn Kira before she sees her file, at which point, of course, she walks in going, warn me about what?
Can I just flag as well? I was interested that Kira just walked in, because previously people have always buzzed the door before walking in.
Is this just Ops in the opener? Were they in Cisco's office?
They're in Cisco's office, yeah.
That is a bit weird, actually, because she should have... Yeah, that displays a certain lack of respect.
But it does. I would put that down to more of a production or script decision. That it's more basically. I've actually made a note to say it's more sitcom, that she walks in just in time to hear herself being discussed. So it wouldn't work if she had to, buzz in. Can I say as well? I loved the opening shot. It's we talk about this a lot on Deep Space Nine, but I love the cinematography. Yes. And it's angled from below the table up, and it pans along the table.
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
Taking them. It's so unusual. And again, a palette cleanser from Vortex, which was very by the numbers.
Incredibly static. It was very... Vortex was multiple cameras, but static or just turning on the spot. There weren't any clearly yeah, there was no panning shots, nothing that carried us from one place to another. Whereas, yes, you're right. This week we're back with that. The direction is far more
I
creative.
thought so. More tight shots, and you'll see this through the episode, but there are more close-in tight shots on people's faces. They emote more visibly. You're more pulled into that scenario, and I thought this was just such a really unusual opening shot that it just really landed well with me. I'm like, yes,
Oh,
this is how Deep Space Nine should be shot. We should see lovely panning views of really unusual angles, so I liked that.
oh, excellent. Didn't even pick up on that. Thank you, Tim.
My pleasure.
But yeah, Cisco hands her a data stick, which is kind of nice and grounded in the real world. It's not a crystal. It's not a password. So it's just a stick with her data on it. I don't think they give it a name, but it is just a little USB stick.
Yeah.
Warning her that she might find her file disappointing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just quickly share an image here on the stream, which is a quick shot of Cisco's little Star Trek laptop, and it has a little profile of Kira Nerys, and we can see very faintly in this grainy 90s TV screen grab that Nana Visitor, and I assume it's Nana, I can't actually make it out from the picture, but she has long hair.
Yeah, it looks very unlike her now, but it is nice that detail that they didn't just take a shot of her, because they couldn't have her in a current uniform. She presumably didn't have that prior to the Federation arriving.
100%.
But yeah, they changed her hair and made her look sufficiently different. That's nice. They thought about it.
And I think as well, if we could make it out, the text in this profile would probably be quite accurate, because the set designers and the production specialists on Star Trek are very attentive to detail, and I think you could probably read that and it would actually make sense. It wouldn't be lorem ipsum. It would actually be a profile, and I wish we could, but unfortunately, with the resolution of the time, as
90s television,
exactly as Kat points out, all filmed on, what was it, film, was it actual film reel rather than...
I'm pretty sure it will have been at that point in the early 90s. It wouldn't have been shot in digital, so it's very low resolution television film reel.
And DS9 sadly has not had a remaster like TNG has, so sadly this grainy quality is all we have. But a nice little, it's on screen for about 3 seconds, but it looks great, and I think it's very believable. I just really like that, so I grabbed that, show that to everyone.
Oh, it's worth seeing, and it's just a really nice way for them to open the episodes. They could have opened on any given scene, and they chose something that shows us a little bit about the past of the characters.
Yeah.
It ties in that Kira has been here for a long time. It reminds us that she is Bajoran and has lived under Cardassian occupation. It's just a very neat little realistic way of having us join the characters in this episode.
I also just want to observe as well, weirdly they don't mention it, but they say this is the last prefix file on Kira. The last prefect of Bajor was Gul Dukat, who was the enemy in season 1 and will return to menace the crew again. So just very... I would just keep that at the back of your mind, that was Dukat's profile of Nerys.
Yeah, because he was in Emissary. I don't think he might have turned up in one subsequent episode, but certainly not often. We've not heard from him in a while.
I think he might like called
them up. It might just be
up.
Emissary Part 2 that I'm thinking of.
It's possible. It's funny, I can't remember either. He might have called up Deep Space Nine just to kind of like yell at them over Space Zoom. That's a very Dukat thing to do. But I will remind chat, obviously, this is Kat's first run through. Please do not spoil it for them. But Dukat, yes, will return and will menace the crew again. So,
that'll be interesting.
It is an interesting mention. Please take us forward, Kat.
But yes, Cisco hands Kira the data stick, and a few moments later she has looked at it and turns up going, a minor operative whose activities are limited to running errands for the terrorist leaders. But by that point Bashir has called Cisco and told him that Kai Opaka has arrived completely unannounced, and she's waiting near airlock 14. So Cisco, just cool as a cucumber, just going, maybe you would like to join us to greet Opaka now that she is here. And Kira just calms down immediately. It's great.
I love the way Nana Visitor telegraphs so physically, that understandable outrage, of being, fighting the Cardassians was her life, and to find out that some Cardassian functionaries described her as a minor annoyance, I can imagine that absolutely cuts her to the quick. And she's visibly vibrating with anger. I
You're
love
right.
that.
She acts with every part of her body. I
I
think
love
even
it.
in the last episode when the cameras were completely still, she was still storming around and raising her arms and leaning on things. And yeah, she gives it her all. It's brilliant.
Yes. I love Nana Visitor is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And she conveys her emotion fantastically. She takes you into every scene. And I love as well how quickly she pivots from outrage to shock to immediate professionalism when Cisco brings her up to date. And that is, I just think, a credit to Nana Visitor that she's just like, what an actor. She pivots so easily, and you just think
And
into the
so
complex.
realistically, she takes us there with the
Realistically,
character. It doesn't feel
exactly.
like she's being directed.
No.
And I think in this episode, particularly in later scenes, she does some incredible acting. She really as you say, draws us into the
It's
scene,
great
carries
too.
us along with a story that it's a sci-fi show. We could easily get lost, get mixed up in the fact that it's a cardboard set, but we don't. She really sells it 100%. So the next shot, walking away from airlock 14, we've got Opaka, Kira, Odo, Cisco, and Bashir. And Cisco is telling Bashir that Opaka has never even left Bajor before. It's her first time on the station. And Bashir says, "Excuse me for saying so, Commander, but she looks preoccupied." And apparently, although he presumably greeted Opaka, learned she was aboard, he hasn't said another thing to her, and she hasn't told him anything. It would have made more sense if there was a sign that those two had been talking, and I think
Yeah.
Bashir and Opaka might have had things to talk about. They both got a curiosity about what lies in the world, the wider world, but no, they just stood there twiddling their thumbs, waiting for Cisco
To turn up.
apparently.
And considering how big Deep Space Nine is, that probably wasn't like immediate. Deep Space Nine is big, you know. So that might have
So
been
yeah, they just stood there in awkward
uncomfortable.
silence. So we're in space now. Yes.
How about that? You don't leave Beta often. No. Okay, but you know that actually kind of fits in because for the rest of this odd walk up to the window, Paco is very withdrawn. She's very quiet. So I
She
can
is.
imagine she was just stood there making Bashir, the most awkward person on Deep Space Nine, more awkward. I imagine that was hilarious for all the wrong reasons.
Sorry we didn't get to see that. But yes, the next thing that anyone says, Kira asks Opaka if something's wrong because she obviously seems preoccupied, and she says she's contemplating prophecy. And Kira says it's interesting that Opaka chose this viewport, which Opaka is looking out of.
Yep.
The wormhole is just out there, and Cisco says that you can only see it when a ship enters or exits, but there's nothing scheduled for today, which Opaka says is a shame. So Cisco just on a whim calls up O'Brien in Ops and says that he and Kira are taking the Kai through the wormhole. And then they turn around and Bashir just stands there like a spare wheel, just expectantly. And Cisco's like, "Well, I didn't want to take you away from your duties." He says, "Oh, it's not a very busy day today."
I mean, the man.
There's no reason for him to go with them unless the plot needs a medical person there. If he'd had a little conversation with Opaka and he'd been saying, "Oh yes, I'm finding it fascinating being on this station too, and I'm intrigued by Bajoran culture," just anything to bind them together. And Opaka could have said, "I'd like it if Dr. Bashir came with us."
Yeah.
Nothing.
No.
No reason to. It's just unusually awkward. It's just rare that Deep Space Nine kind of lampshades the "we didn't expect you to come with us, Bashir." Well, I want to. Okay, then. Because that's pretty much word for word what they say.
Yeah, it absolutely. I honestly think it was. Maybe I did have my notes somewhere that said this was. I think this was written by a new writer who just pitched the script to the show, and it was rewritten a few times. And I think they were just leaning in very hard to the Bashir is an awkward man who doesn't take social cues very well. Let's play that up. And also bring him with us somewhere where we need a doctor. So
it does work, and I think also that because they're later really leaning heavily on the relationship between Kira and Opaka, if Bashir had been lingering around wanting to have more Opaka time, it just couldn't have worked as well. There isn't space for Bashir and Opaka to get to know each other. So it might have been a deliberate decision to distance those characters rather than draw them together. But for whatever reason, it's totes awkward. But as you say, it's Bashir. He's meant to be totes awkward at all times.
But I also acknowledge that it is very heavily done, And again,
it's just not as smooth as we're used to with Deep Space Nine.
No, this is it. And considering this is only season 1, it's impressive that they are achieving any smoothness at all because these actors, these writers, these producers are all finding these characters for the first time. It's one thing to describe somebody on a page, but I'm sure any professional actor can tell us realizing them on screen, directing them on screen, cutting their scenes on screen is difficult, and it will evolve naturally. And it will be interesting, I think, maybe at the end of maybe this season and then the end of season 2, if we look at the characters and see how much they've changed since we first met them,
Yes.
we might.
Oh, that would be fun, yeah.
That just popped in my head, but that might be really interesting for us to kind of understand how the characters have changed and our perceptions.
Yeah, because I am anticipating that the writing will start to follow what the chemistry between the characters is like.
100%.
Once they've seen the actors in character for
Yeah.
a whole season, they'll know who works well together, who's funny on screen together, who doesn't mesh so well and might be funny to see more of. So yeah, that would be a nice project for us to have.
I think so. I did also notice that Bashir must have had a quiet day, because otherwise, why would he be at the airlock unloading supplies like a porter or, that's
a good point. I'm assuming they're medical supplies from Bajor, but yeah, it's a good point. Why is Bashir himself there doing that?
He's the chief. Doesn't he have people who work for him to do that? But
I don't know if he does, actually. We haven't seen any medical assistants yet.
I think we've seen maybe like a Bajoran nurse once or
twice. Possibly an unnamed.
Oh yeah, definitely nobody with lines. Definitely not. And I just wanted to note as well, Kai Opaka portrayed, and I made a note of her name, the actress, for the first time, Camille Saviola. I love that she's actually very quiet and withdrawn, but she still has an incredible presence.
She does, and with the Bajoran nose ridges as well, which could interfere with a person's emotion
100%
on screen. But yeah, you're right. She has a tremendous and she's a relatively short person as well, but she has so much gravitas. She really does. She's commanding when she's on screen.
100%. And when she says, oh, it's a shame, and looks over her shoulder, I mean, just the weight of the implication clearly hits Sisko like a boulder, and he's like, I guess I'm taking Kai Opaka through the wormhole, because she can convey it with a look. And, that made me believe, yes, this person is a spiritual leader of a culture, of a planet. She is clearly the glue that holds Bajoran society together. Brilliant. Absolute credit to somebody who has now said about 7 words in this episode. Brilliant. I was really impressed with her, and I am impressed with her throughout this episode. So I just wanted to really say, immediately taken with her impact.
Oh, she is excellent. And the next scene is O'Brien and the Bajoran man are leaving the airlock. They've just prepped the ship for departure. And Opaka asks O'Brien, who's just standing, waiting for them to board, you have a child, don't you? And he nods and says that he has a little girl. So she gives him her necklace and says, please give this to her. And I've written down that Opaka has an air of mysterious knowing about her. There's firstly that she knew that Miles had a child, because I don't know that they've ever met before.
Nope.
But also I suspect that this is her giving away one of the few objects that she has on her, because she knows that she isn't going to be returning. It's one of the early hints in the episode of what is going to play out.
There's a lot of talk of prophecies, and I think from everything we've seen of Bajoran culture so far, they clearly have a very advanced understanding of time, cause and effect, all of that. So it's not just, like prophecy as a tired fancy trope. It's more like, actually kind of knowing what's coming.
And I was interested that in this episode, she refers to prophecy and prophecy about her own life multiple times and never breathes a word of what the prophecy actually was. She doesn't say what images or symbolism were in it. No. She doesn't give any phrases. There was no poetry. No, you will go to a place that is of this description. We don't hear any of it, which feels really unusual, because usually a writer will tease the audience with, well, this is what looks as if is going to happen because the prophecy is phrased thus. And then you can turn it on its head. You can do something different with it, or you can make it an inevitability. There are so many things you can do, but they just don't tell us what the prophecy is. She holds it to herself.
Yeah,
it's really important to her, and she doesn't share it.
I'd not thought about that, but I think she is intentionally keeping that information to herself. But the episode as a whole does seem to be not a surprise. I mean, some of the details clearly are, but she seems to say, and by the end of the episode, she's very, I am where I'm meant to be. The prophet sent me here. This is my course. So I think it doesn't come as a surprise to her, but none of that is signposted to us beyond the fleeting moments of Kai Opaka, like perhaps choosing that window and looking to where the wormhole is, like, I know where I've got to go. And, prompting Sisko to take her to follow the signal. She's very subtly nudging this episode forward.
And I think I put in my notes that in terms of the prophecy, it can be read as being self-fulfilling.
Yeah.
She came to the station because of the prophecy. She looked out of the window hoping to see the wormhole because of the prophecy. She didn't ask, actually. She kind of hinted, oh, it's a shame we won't be going through the wormhole today. And Sisko takes her there. And once they get through, there's a signal. And she says, well, I'm here, but I don't mind. Let's follow the signal.
Even though Sisko
almost
would
insists.
never. Yeah, even though
If she had never heard of the prophecy, none of this shit would be happening.
Precisely. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, how self-fulfilling is it? It's interesting. It calls into question exactly what the motives of the prophets are, because they also give Ben Sisko a lot of information, and then just kind of leave him to it. And he's like, what am I meant to do? So they give you some information, then they let you go out there and do things. So it is, I think, a question of how much they determine your destiny versus how much you determine your own.
And I imagine that some of it is left open because it's a religion ultimately, and it does 100%. Need to remain mysterious to us as an audience and to its adherents. But yeah, again, it's interesting that Ben has had this Commander Sisko.
You can call him Ben if you want. I don't think he'd mind.
I'm not Dax. I can't be calling him Benjamin. But it's interesting that he had a very intense experience in encountering the prophets and isn't talking to Opaka about that now. He's been sitting alone on that and presumably hasn't talked about it with anyone. And here is Opaka, and they're just, let's just go off on a day trip through the wormhole. He could have taken her to his office. He could have asked for alone time, and he just doesn't. I feel that they've dropped that previous thread that these two characters held together.
Which is a shame, because that would be one of the most compelling conversations, I think, ever. My only thought is, one, the producers didn't want to give away too much of that kind of storyline. Two, perhaps they hadn't developed a lot of that storyline at this point.
It is very early days. They don't want to. Yeah, if they did know what they planned, they didn't want to give it away at this point.
100%.
And it's possible, as you say, they just haven't developed it beyond that.
That's also possible.
So the Kai is here as a representative of Bashir, as a close confidant of Kira, and that's pretty much it.
I think that's the way the episode is geared more towards Kira and Opaka having that relationship rather than Sisko and Opaka, even though it would make more sense for Sisko and Opaka to have that relationship, because Sisko is the emissary and he has had, as you say, that very intense experience with the prophets that you think would deserve far more attention, but it just does not happen, and that's fine. We will have to trust in the producers, not the prophets, to reveal their motivations.
We're just skipping back to chat for a moment. The Indar Cat points out that the Kai has more power than all of the popes combined.
That's a perfect comparison, and well observed. Yes, well observed. That is exactly the parallel I think we're meant to draw. And I also see Nigel there. He and I were talking about certain Star Trek tropes, such as, bringing along a doctor, somewhat signposting the fact that you'll need a doctor on this away mission. So,
exactly. Why is Bashir there? We will find out.
It's probably going to involve a medical emergency. Absolutely love it. So
we then have the opening credits, and the next shot is of the shuttle, the Yangtze Kiang, traveling through space. And Opaka thanks Sisko for indulging her in bringing her along. And Kira says, "Not at all, Opaka. You honour us with your presence." And as they enter the wormhole, there's an absolutely beautiful graphic, which I think hasn't been seen before when someone enters the wormhole.
Let me bring that up. There we go. So again, grainy. I apologise for that, but yes, the wonderful interior of the wormhole, that shimmering blue-purple kind of aura effect with those golden rings. Very unusual.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful. It's very artistic, and I think this is the first time we've seen that specific shot of it. Usually we'll see a ship entering and then exiting.
Yes.
I think this is more of it from their point of view.
Absolutely. I think there were some brief shots inside the wormhole from Emissary, but I think that was mainly from inside, looking out of a runabout's windows. Whereas this, we can actually see the runabout traveling down the wormhole itself, which is, yeah, you're right, very unusual. Normally, DS9 only shows you the enter and exit. But,
and as they exit the
gorgeous.
wormhole in the Gamma Quadrant, Cisco congratulates Kira on his smoothest ride through the wormhole yet, which I think is just really sweet because it's both a very sincere, she's done her job well, and he's bigging her up slightly in front of the Kai, who's really important to her.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
100.
really nice for him to do that.
It is in front of Badron Pope, as it were.
Yes.
I
And
like that.
Bashir points out Idran, the nearest system, which is a ternary star, which I looked up because I'd assumed that it meant it was part of a 3 or 4 star system. It just means any star that's part of a system of 2 or more. So it's a ternary system.
Oh, thank
or a
you.
binary
I'd
system.
actually assumed they meant it's trinary is when there are 3 stars in the
Yes,
system.
exactly. So later on in the
Thank
episode,
you.
they refer to it as a binary system, and I went back to check. So I thought they
Oh.
made a mistake, and they haven't. They're better than that.
Oh,
I just didn't know the
interesting.
terminology.
That's good, and I think that's a bit of established world building as well. I think they've mentioned Idran before, like the first time Cisco and Dax emerged. I think they, tried to get their bearings. Asked the computer, and the computer said the nearest star is named Idran, and it is located 70,000 light years from home, and everybody went nuts. So it's nice that they've remembered that and put that back in. It's a landmark. It lets us know you are now in the Gamma Quadrant because there's Idran, which is nowhere near home. I also just want to quickly mention, before they left the Alpha Quadrant, Cisco specifically says to DS9, we will be back by 1400 hours.
Oh, that's some fucking foreshadowing.
It absolutely is. But you know what? It should happen. It should happen because so many times in Star Trek, people, go, wow, they're like 8 hours overdue, or wow, Cisco hasn't radioed in for 3 days. This is one of the rare times somebody in Star Trek says, I will be back by 2. If I'm not,
I'll be home for my tea.
Happened.
You'll know if I'm
Yes.
not that something's gone wrong.
100%. That's it. And it's so noticeable because it so rarely happens in Star Trek, allowing people to get into the kind of trouble that Star Trek always gives them. So I actually had to make a note of it because it was so unusual.
It is an example of that very famous trope of the commander or the captain, of course, buggers off the station at any given drop of a hat.
And exactly what Nigel mentioned.
Through the wormhole. Kira makes sense. Yeah. Cisco doesn't have to be there, but she definitely shouldn't be there.
No, you would give it to a lieutenant or a lieutenant commander, some junior. The commander of the station should stay on the station. Nigel mentions
give it to
in
your
chat.
expert pilot, the safest person to take her through, not just the dude who's in charge of absolutely everything and is a safe pilot. It's just
And his deputy as well, the only Bajoran liaison officer on the station. I mean,
let's take the most important person from Bajor and take the 2 most important people from the station and go in one little shuttle through a wormhole. That makes sense. No danger at all there.
Nothing bad could possibly
it's
happen.
Territory, but I'm sure there's nothing there. It's fine.
Careful, Kat, you are pushing at the foundations of Star Trek here, and it is a rickety structure. If you pull on that thread, this whole sweater will unravel before your very eyes. Because it is. The amount of times the senior staff in Star Trek put themselves in outright harm's way is ludicrous.
At least they've stopped taking a load of dudes in red shirts who can then get picked off before them. They just go on their own now. They don't take disposables with them anymore, which I guess is progress.
Yeah. But it'll be interesting to see what that does to the drama of the episode for us, the viewer. We will have to keep an eye on that. But yes, this is an away team with 3 main cast members and a significant guest star. So the stakes are high.
And yes, as you pointed out earlier, Cisco specifies that when they've gone through the wormhole, they're on the other side of the galaxy. The Gamma Quadrant is 70,000 light years from Bajor, and it would take our fastest starship over 67 years to get here. And I just I noted for the first time as he was saying that, I like that they've set it within the same galaxy. They could have said, this is the other side of the universe. We have no idea. We've got no plots of these stars. We'd have had, because a wormhole could in theory take you absolutely anywhere. But they grounded it by having it in the same galaxy and just emphasizing the immense size that the galaxy is.
I'd never thought of that, and that's a really good point because it's, I think, generally sci-fi. I mean, there's a whole entry in TV tropes. I love TV tropes. There's a whole entry in TV tropes just titled "Sci-Fi Writers Have No Sense of Scale." and they will casually move between interplanetary, interstellar, intergalactic, and universal distances with no frame of reference. Star Trek almost always avoids that. Very, very rarely do they refer to anything from outside the galaxy, and if they do, it's very unusual. Things from outside the Milky Way, because it is our galaxy as we recognise it, are unusual, powerful, strange, and weird. So I think that was a very intentional decision on the part of the writers and producers to say no, this remains within the known Star Trek galaxy, and that will carry on to Voyager. I mean, I think it's fair to spoil that for Kat, who has also not seen.
I have heard that they explore the Delta Quadrant, which, again, these are different quadrants, presumably marked out quarters of the galactic plate.
Precisely. But again, it stresses that although you are in the same galaxy, a galaxy in an immense place, and that is a formidable distance. So you're absolutely right. I'd never clocked that they do keep everything within one galaxy, which I think is actually a sign of creative restraint at a time when you could just casually say, oh, yeah, they're on the other side of the universe now. How scary. They don't. They say, it's a long way. It's not terrifyingly, but it's long enough that it would seriously worry you. And remember, you watched a lot of the original series. Kirk went on a 5-year mission, and that was seen to be a massive undertaking. 67 years travel? Forget about it. I mean, just forget about it.
Oh, God. Imagine if you were on a generation ship setting off for the Gamma Quadrant, and then suddenly this wanker at this bloody space station finds a wormhole and gets there in 5 minutes.
I'm just going to mention, you've mentioned that. Starfield, the latest space RPG from Bethesda, has that exact scenario. You can encounter a generation ship from old Earth who are like, who the hell are you? And they spend a lot of time thinking you're aliens because they think they've reached an alien culture, and it's like, oh no, sorry. After you left, we discovered faster than light travel, and the human colonists are just so like kind of crestfallen. They're like, oh,
our whole lives.
Okay.
And so the lives of our children and grandchildren.
Exactly. And they meet humans, and they're far from being the pioneers of a brave frontier. They're just like a curious anomaly of a forgotten age that have no ability to adapt to modern culture. It's actually very sad. So you've put your finger there on a very contentious sci-fi plot point.
I'm glad that isn't something that crops up later in the series as a very big plot point, because I could have accidentally, they could have decided to do that. I'm glad they didn't.
Thankfully, no. But we are segueing madly, which is our point. Kat, I beg of you.
Too much to talk about.
Get us back on course, please.
But yes, there was something that Opaka said that I picked up on.
Yes. So they've talked about Idran. We are 67 years best travel from the Federation.
Oh, come on, where's it gone? There's something in the notes I want to pick up on.
You can imagine we have pages and pages of notes for the benefit of our viewers, and sometimes it can be hard to keep a track, especially when we just randomly segue like this. I did note...
We'll carry on. I'll come across it eventually.
Sure. So I think our notes probably sync up, because I have at this point that, they're talking about how there's not a lot in the local neighbourhood of the terminus of the wormhole in the Gamma Quadrant. There's just Idran, which is a fairly boring system by all accounts. And Opaka is clearly curious. She wants to see more of the Gamma Quadrant, but again, it's with these overtones of...
Oh, this is it. This is it. Bashir points out Idran, and Opaka says, a doorway into the unknown, which I suspect was part of the wording of her prophecy.
I think you're absolutely right. I did wonder about those poetic words. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, she is. She's working to this prophecy that she will not share, which seems a bit risky. Like, unless the prophecy says, and your companions will not be harmed, I'd be concerned. And I'd want that information.
That's a very good point. Yeah, from an empathic point of view, she's dragging them along with her. But yeah, I assume that the prophecy indicates to her that she has further work to do. She will survive, and she perhaps assumes that her companions will therefore survive with her. But yeah, they all go into a dangerous situation at her behest, and she never apologizes for that. Opaka.
I guess when you're space pope, you're not used to kind of apologizing for anything. But
the prophets are mysterious.
Yes, precisely, as we will find out. But yes, Opaka is indeed pushing them in that direction. I think Sisko is understandably cautious. He has a VIP on board. He's being cautious, and they do pick up that strange signal. And he's like, I think he says, launch a probe, we'll follow up on it later. And Parker says, do not be reticent on my behalf, which is completely 100% the antithesis of what Sisko should actually do. He should absolutely be cautious because she's on board. She's the most important person on Bajor at this point. In the provisional government, we hear from like sporadically, and we've not seen like a leader, a prime minister, or a president, or anything. But Kai Opaka, as was established in the first episode, is the glue that holds Bajoran culture together.
And Bajor has just come out of an occupation. They have militarized factions. They will be dangerous if we endanger their pope.
It has been said on several times, Bajor is on the verge of civil war. If the Kai speaks for unity, unity can be reluctantly achieved. So Sisko should be like, absolutely not. We've had a nice sightsee. I'm taking you home because if anything happens to you...
Let's go as far away from here as we possibly can in
100%.
one jump. And then stay there and follow a signal. The mysterious... Oh, my God.
We would not have an episode of such excitement, and blatant disregard of the regulations was not followed.
So Star Trek.
So Star Trek. 100%. And so they follow up on the signal, and...
Oh, it's a subspace signal. It's one of the first. In the first couple of episodes, subspace got mentioned constantly. They've actually been very conservative with it recently. We've had a lot of technobabble that didn't involve it, which I've been surprised by. I thought subspace was going to be the thing the Doctor uses, screwdriver.
The sonic screwdriver, yes.
I thought subspace was going to be the MacGuffin by which everything gets problematized and resolved, but it hasn't been.
Which it is in TNG, which you've seen almost all of, I think. Subspace is their quantum, for anything sci-fi-esque that you need a shortcut explanation of. So it is surprising that the DS9 writers have held back, but here it is. It is a subspace signal that lures them to a planet. I think the signal's like just some... It's not even a distress signal, despite what the Wikipedia
It turns out to be a
description.
malfunctioning satellite that was demanding statistical data,
Yes,
but getting no response, so it just kept pinging out the same message.
So it wasn't a distress signal, which is like 9 times out of 10 what the Enterprise would receive. They respond to a distress signal. This time it's just a weird signal, which I think allays some of their caution as well. They're like, oh, well, it doesn't sound like anybody's in trouble, so we're probably fine to check it out. But they get there and they find this satellite network, and I wish I'd got a picture of it because they look at it on a screen on the runabout, and it looks like satellites orbiting a planet.
Yes, it's quite nice. You've got Majel Barrett's computer voice describing it, and as you say, there's nice little orbiting satellites around the moon.
Because normally Star Trek falls back on, just a blob on a screen with like some letters and numbers around it. It's all a bit shorthand sci-fi.
That's a good point. They've let the art and design team do quite a bit on this one. There's a lot of screen with actual stuff on it.
I thought so. So I really enjoyed that little, again, it's just some attention to detail that makes DS9 stand out for me. They check it out. They get close to the satellites.
And Bashir says the shuttle system has detected life forms on the moon's surface. They may be humanoid, sir. We don't know why he thinks they may be humanoid. And also, it's really Earth-centric to keep referring to... In TNG, we worked out that there is a single life form, which is the origin of the Romulans, the Vulcans, the Klingons, the the explanation for why everyone's basically human with plastic stuck to their heads. But we refer to them as humanoid, which feels so Earth-centric for a federation of planets that takes it... You'd have thought they'd have come up with a different term for it, but I guess it's audience-friendly.
I think that's what it is, absolutely. But it is a shame. It is a shame that they couldn't just dip a little bit deep into sci-fi creativity and say bipedal sentience. Or even just sentience. Sentience works. That's...
Yes.
That's any life form that thinks that we can talk to. Great. That would work.
That's a really good goddamn point. That's so much more important, though, because it could just be speechless apes down there.
Or amoeba, jellyfish, sentient trees,
whether they're
talking
humanoid-shaped isn't important. It's whether they're sentient. Good point. Bloody Federation. Coming in here looking for humanoids.
Humanoids. You'd look great in a Starfleet uniform, which has 2 holes for arms, 2 holes for legs, and 1 hole for a head. You know, it's interesting. Cats
Oh my god.
watching through the original series films, and there is a great line in one of them coming up that they haven't seen yet, which describes the Federation as a human-centric club.
It is.
And
It so
it's
is.
such a great
Oh,
line, and I will say
I
nothing
know
more
it.
about it because I don't want to spoil it, but it is such an interesting way to look at the Federation, which, yeah, weirdly is. Oh, this is going to be a painful segue now, but yeah, the Federation, because it has to tap into a human audience, because it's a sci-fi show for a human audience, is very human-centric. And, you know, we have exceptions. Klingon Worf and half-Betazoid Troy and an android Data. We're all basically human-looking aliens on TNG. DS9 has human-looking Odo and Bajoran human-looking Kira. They're all humans, and sorry, human-looking Dax, you know, as Trill. But the Federation, headquartered on Earth, all of the admirals we meet, who are all absolutely mad, are all
Yes, all
humans.
of them human.
Every captain of a Federation starship is a human with some few exceptions, you know?
Mm.
So I appreciate that they have to make the Federation of Planets, you know, relatable to us as an audience, but it is so human centric. And that
Yes.
is something that Star Trek will always, always struggle with, I think. Always.
I think Prodigy is able to play with that a little bit more, partly because
Prodigy's
the characters are
great.
not Federation members to begin with, and partly because it's animated. You can have
Mm-hmm.
a sentient blob,
Mm.
and you don't need to worry about how you're going to animate it week to week, because everyone's animated.
It's
Yeah,
great.
imagine what Odo could have been like if he didn't have to be humanoid in
Exactly.
most scenes. He could appear as anything. He could be a sentient cloud of gas, I guess, if he wanted to be. But
100%.
production costs would have been horrendous.
And how to make the audience empathize with a sentient cloud of gas, you know? I appreciate the constraints, but it does run counter somewhat to the Federation's, you know, supposed, you know, setup. And in fact, I think um, the backgrounder mentions that Cisco in this episode will describe how the Federation is set up. It is an alliance of worlds that works together for mutual scientific exploration and defense purposes. Well, if
Yes.
that's the case, where the hell's everyone else? Why am I only ever seeing inhabitants of Sol 3 always doing this? Where are
We'll
everyone else?
we'll come back to this issue later because it is an interesting place where the medium dictates the
Yeah,
message.
yeah,
The
that's
fact that
true.
you have to film with humans
Yep.
because we don't have any other sentient life that's capable of acting on Earth. African grey parrots, perhaps, and some chimps who we try not to use for humanitarian reasons. But yeah, we have to have human actors, and that dictates the shape of
course
the
it does.
stories that you can tell.
Of course it does. And as you point out, Discovery is the alternative because they're animated. And Discovery's great. I encourage anyone to go
Prodigy,
and watch
sorry.
it. Oh, sorry,
Disco is
sorry.
made with humans.
Discovery is, yes, sorry, I'm getting myself mixed up. But Prodigy is great. And I also love the fact that it shows you Star Trek utterly from the point of view of aliens who have no idea what the Federation is. What a refreshing, refreshing change.
And aliens who have not been helped by the Federation. The Federation hasn't reached out to them, hasn't assisted them in any way. They're living a Federation-free life.
Yes. It's such a refreshing view. I'm working my way through it now. I think I'm just into season 2, and it's great. Really, really enjoying it, so I recommend that to anyone. But we're segueing violently again. Captain Cat, please get us back on course.
Yes, so everyone's hesitant to go
Yes.
closer to this moon. Opaka says, she actually leans forward and puts a hand on Cisco's shoulder and says, please, Commander, I don't get out often.
I love that line. That's so good.
Playing on her little old ladiness. It's kind of adorable. They've determined that there are biopans being read from the surface, but they can't tell whether they're human because there's too much, humanoid, because there's too much interference. One of the satellites starts heading towards them, and Kira reads a huge energy buildup, and it fires on them. And I really like the scene where they are plummeting towards the surface of the moon. Obviously, you've got the standard, everyone jiggles in
I
the
made
chairs,
a note of that.
and the camera starts shaking, and they've also got smoke entering the cockpit.
Now
they
I
make
noticed
it look
that.
as though the set is falling apart. It's impressive. It goes beyond the usual TNG.
And maybe some sparks, which I think were computer generated, put in afterwards. No, you actually, I love that as well. I made an exact note of that as well. They are clearly, you know, in peril.
Yeah,
And
I think Kira's reading off systems that are failing, things that are going on. The forward thrusters are gone, they're losing power. And it really feels dangerous. It feels like there's real peril here.
And it also shows the command crew in control. You know, they all know exactly what they're doing. Bashir's monitoring the hull temperature. Cisco, I think, at one point ejects the antimatter fuel pod.
It does, yes.
Brilliant. You know, they have been utterly blindsided by this development, but they are trained Starfleet officers, and they are going to try and make the best of the situation they can. So I liked it. Really good early introduction of peril. Loved that scene.
Just before they hit, Cisco says, "Brace for impact!" And at that point, I realized they have no seatbelts, at all. They're in a small shuttlecraft that is meant to land on planets, planetoids, asteroids, moons often, and presumably for reasons of it'll wrinkle the uniform. But they don't have seatbelts fitted. Which is a problem here. It's plot relevant that they have no freaking seatbelts. But when we fade to black as they crash onto the moon, when we fade up again, we've got another really nice bit of camera movement. We're on a moon that's covered with large rocks and it has a cave system, and the camera moves up out of darkness behind a rock and pans to the right where the crashed shuttle is. It doesn't just bring us up on the static crashed shuttle. No. It actually moves and it makes you feel as if you are there.
Yes.
You're there interacting with the landscape. You're behind a rock. You're peeking out. You're moving towards the shuttle. It's so nicely done.
I hadn't realised how well shot that scene was until you described it, but it absolutely is. And it reinforces as well when that panel dramatically explodes off and Bashir emerges.
There's a jump cut. We're suddenly really close to it. And as you say, as soon as that jump cut happens, there's a flash of sparks as the panel flies off. And it feels urgent. It feels like we're being dragged into the danger at that moment.
It does. And Bashir gets out and you suddenly realise, oh my god, that's really there. Because previously, in Vortex, in fact, they had a model set and it was, I've got to admit, quite clearly a model runabout on a model moon. This time, no, they've got a full-size runabout that they have crashed and Bashir and the crew emerge from it and you're like, that's really happening.
Yeah, they made the actors crawl through a tiny crawl space where this panel's come off.
No models here. That is a full-size set. As you say, the rocks, the smoke, the caves, it's all really there in a show that, you know, has previously relied so much on models, which is understandable from a production point of view, but this is more dramatic, it's more compelling to see them interacting with such a really brilliant set that is, as you say, so well shot. You know, and they do this a lot through this episode, you know, they really take advantage of this. They'll find new angles on what is clearly the same set, but they will find new angles, use the smoke, use fire, rocks, the huge crash shuttle. Brilliant. Really enjoyed, you know, the scene setting there.
Yes, definitely. It's come on leaps and bounds since the days of TOS and a painted backdrop and a few rocks get on stage. And so much better than the last episode where you've got the only scene on an asteroid. It's just one camera pointing at part of it. Yeah, you're right. It's just so much nicer this week. Oh, thank goodness.
Yes.
So yes, Cisco crawls out first, followed by Bashir, and then they both turn and they carry out Opaka, who is unconscious at this point, I think. They carry her prone body away from the vessel, and there's string music playing on the soundtrack in the background. And I like the way that the medical emergency is described here. Bashir says pulmonary collapse, her upper thoracic vertebrae have been crushed. And I love that at that moment they didn't choose to give her alien physiognomy, because it would have been very easy to say, oh, her third heart is punctured, or this organ that Bajorans have that we don't have has been destroyed. No, it's the kind of impact that someone who'd been in a car accident might have. The spine has been crushed into her lungs and she can't take in air. And it hits so much harder for that. It grounds it in reality and it makes it more urgent. It doesn't carry us away into a fantasy of it. We're not left intellectualizing it. It's very immediate and it's painful to watch.
It is. I've got to admit, Opaka's obviously stunned and pained face really took me aback.
She has her eyes wide open even after she dies. She lies there with her eyes dull, gazing upwards. It's very graphic for Star Trek. It's unusual that we see death on these times.
Unusually, yeah. As you say, they would normally hide behind some kind of sci-fi reason that somebody's dead, or you know, its eyes closed. But no, in this, it's a very visible, very violent scene. And I think you're absolutely right to flag this in the content warning, because I was taken aback by it. Now, you know, 30 years after the fact, I was like, this is a vivid scene. And Bashir starts CPR to try and resuscitate her, but the tricorder, you know, in one of the few times the tricorder makes a different noise, gives out that kind of
Yeah, it's
TV
just a flat
shorthand,
tone,
flat
isn't it? Just
tone.
consistently of the kind that you get from a, I can't remember the name, it's the ECG. It's the machine that monitors heart rate
Yes,
in prone
100%.
patients.
So it is clearly a TV shorthand to let you know, yeah, unfortunately, the devices that tell us somebody's dead has told us
Even though
they're
2 or
dead.
3 episodes ago we were told that that device is no good at all when someone's
Oh my
just
god, I'd forgotten about
Bashir.
that. Oh my god. Oh,
But in that instance, further investigation was necessary. Had to look for a specific alien organ near the shoulder. In this case, it's
oh,
very real crush injury.
oh. And I remember hating that line, and you know what? You've brought it back, and I hate it all over again. What a stupid.
Well,
We've
you're
got
going to have to
one
lean on the bloody
device.
tricorder to tell you when someone's dead. You don't say, do you know what? Tricorders are terrible for registering whether someone's dead
We
or
have
not.
one device that we use for every situation like this. We literally have a medical tricorder. That's what it's called. And you're telling me it can't tell if someone's. I would send that back, because that is not fit for purpose. Ooh, Kat, you are stirring the fires of my frustration with Star Trek now.
You hate the thing that you love. That's what I'm here for.
100%, that's what this is. This
But
this this podcast pulls no punches, all right? We will call out crap when we see it.
yeah,
Um,
the scene
yes,
continues though, and
please,
it
yes.
remains as fraught as it
Yeah.
began.
Oh,
Nana visitors Kira looks so distraught
incredibly
at the death of
visibly.
Opaka.
Yeah.
She leans over her. There is the phrase for it, and I can't think of a better one, is ugly crying. She isn't weeping a few little tears. Her mouth is open. She's screaming out
Yeah.
her grief.
Yeah.
It's very vivid and very immediate, and particularly
Mm.
given that the actor knows that that person's coming back in a few minutes, she really responds as though this person who she loves has died, and it's just it's difficult to watch. There's
I
so
thought
much
so.
pain in her performance.
I thought so. Again, and I said it at the beginning of the episode, but it's testament to Nana Visitor. What a brilliant actor she is. Yeah, I felt utterly convinced that she was in the throes of extreme grief. And I don't think it's actually all that characteristic, but Cisco and Bashir step back and leave her to it. And I mean, I don't know what you do in that scenario. I'm not a professional grief counselor, but they leave her, so the focus is entirely just on Opaka and Kira, and
And
it's
Kira lifts
tough.
Opaka's hands and starts chanting some words, some presumably Bajoran
Mm,
words.
mm,
And the camera lingers for a long time on her
mm,
there, just
mm.
holding this woman's hand up to her face and sobbing.
Really
Yeah,
powerful.
I'm glad that they gave time for
Yes,
that, particularly given where the script is going. They really do.
100%.
They want it to be impactful, and it
Exactly. They
really is.
don't undervalue it, regardless of what comes, you know. And I think that's key to the episode, because, yeah, obviously as the episode goes, we learn that death is not permanent here, but we under the argument is that then that you undervalue the impact of death, you know, the actual emotional significance of it.
That's a very good point. Yes, it
It
shows an
popped in there.
example of how critical death is, how final, how heartbreaking. And then we move on to a culture of people for whom that just isn't. That's a really good point. That will
And
be a deliberate way of framing the story.
exactly, because you can see how it then desensitizes them to the outcomes of their actions. And what you think is then like, oh, great, brilliant, oh, Kai Opaka's fine, then sets you up for the second fall, which is she's not fine. Nobody here is fine, especially not if you ever want to leave this place. So it's kind of like a rise and fall situation. But I'm jumping ahead. So
But just briefly to check into
yeah.
chat, the Indoor Cat has commented, I vaguely recall that DS9 was a bit groundbreaking in the whole this might need a content warning type television, genre of television, given subject matter, language, graphic imagery, among other things. They didn't sugarcoat much. And you're right, the episode, I watched it on Netflix, it's a 15. It's got a high rating.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
presumably that is for the graphic imagery, the fact
there is a
of death,
lot.
that it does go into it, that depth.
100%, yeah. And I didn't realize it was rated a 15, but that is believable. Because it is a very graphic episode, but also I think it deals with some very adult concepts. And grief is something, and death, and permanency of loss like that is something I think that 90s, television just would skirt around. It's very rare that you would find a show in this era being like, okay, how do we deal with death? What if we turn it on its head and it's not permanent? Let's explore this. You just would not get that in contemporary
I've just watched Star Trek 2 and have started watching Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, which is a fine example of there is some wonderful grief acting in The Search for Spock.
Yes.
But I know full well that the man's coming back.
Yes, 100%. All I can say for Star Trek 2 is at the time the intention was that Spock was not. The actor made it very clear. Leonard Nimoy said, I'm done with Star Trek. I want to.
But they still put that little trapdoor in Spock.
They did. It's never clear.
Meld with McCoy.
With McCoy, he saved his Catra. It's not clear, and I've read most of the books around the films. It's not clear at what point Leonard Nimoy's mind was changed.
Maybe when they offered him directing.
I've got to admit, that might have helped, but...
This is the wrong
This is not the right...
Deep Space Nine now. We're in the Gamma Quadrant. The Kai is dead.
Yes.
And we fade to black on an exterior shot of DS9. We fade to black, and then we come up on a shot of DS9. Dak and O'Brien are in ops, and Odo walks up because the team are 3.5 hours overdue.
Have we not?
Which we know because... What? Oh.
I was just going to flag, just after Opaka dies... Strangers emerge from the caves to confront the... I'm going to call them the away team because that's what they are. But they confront the away team and they look like hardened kind of... I've got in my notes that they look like kind of space road warriors. They look very post-apocalyptic, very hard-bitten space warriors, and they have weapons. And Sisko just says, looks like we have company. And woof. That's the end of the scene. So we have a new threat on the horizon, right on the heels of this horrific loss. So sorry to take you out.
No, I'm ignoring the plot in favour of a grief section of it. So yes, hugely important. They've now got dangerous-looking people with them.
They do.
And then we're going back on DS9.
Yes.
And they're running 3.5 hours overdue. Odo says there are Packers people on subspace to me every 5 minutes.
I love this scene.
And O'Brien, he's very good. He tell them truthfully, one of our runabouts found a trace of a warp eddy current. It's got to be from their ship.
Yep.
And Dak says that with any luck, we should be able to determine what direction they were headed. But it's probably technologically realistic. They haven't been able to send a message back through the wormhole to say, we found a signal at this heading. This is where we are. The commander of the station, the Bajoran Pope, and they haven't told anyone where they're going.
It is unbelievably risky, and yes, you know what late episodes establish, you can't get a signal through the wormhole, so they are completely incommunicado on the other side of the wormhole. So it is not all surprising that there is this absolute panic on the other side. I love this scene as well because it turns out that in Kira's absence, Odo is the liaison to the Bajoran government, which I don't think is a role he's ever wanted.
That's an excellent point. But yeah, it does kind of make sense. He's been there longer than anyone else. He's probably better known to other Bajorans. He's not Starfleet affiliated. So yeah, I hadn't picked up on that. But you're right. In Kira's absence, he's the one who talks to Bajor and tries to reassure them that Space Pup's gone missing. But it'll be fine, guys. No worries.
Promise we will return your most revered spiritual leader to you any moment now. But what did I say in this? I love that Odo is the liaison because he is the perfect person to voice, frustration with what is essentially a Star Trek trope. That the senior staff have all just buggered off and gotten lost. And it makes sense that somebody outside of the Federation would be like, this is insane. They've gone missing. How can you operate like this? So coming from Odo with his lovely kind of gruff reality, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And there's that brilliant scene of Dax and O'Brien get on the lift. And they have a conversation. And the camera descends as Dax is giving some last-minute advice to Odo.
And we see Odo kind of shaking his head, holding his clipboard and walking away as we descend into the lift with the camera.
Brilliant.
It's beautiful. Completely unnecessary. We could just have shot it over Odo's shoulder. But no, they go for it. It looks so good.
Doesn't it look good? Again, it's that depth. It's that unusual angle. You would never get it in TNG because every lift shuts the doors and you can't see anyone anymore.
There are no actual levels in TNG. It's presumably all just sets on the same floor.
Not Deep Space Nine. Ops is on multiple levels. The bar, multiple levels. The promenade,
Moving
multiple
lifts,
levels.
The future.
Love it. I absolutely love it. And the only thing I'm going to say at the end of this scene, the obvious implication is Jackson and O'Brien are heading to the runabout plaid. That means all of the senior staff are now going to leave the station, leaving, I guess, Odo on his own.
Security officer Odo,
Who
who's
is
now
not
on his own,
Starfleet.
looking after the whole station.
I mean,
We don't-
presumably
we've
there
had,
is.
we've just had a Bajoran transporter arrive a few hours ago. Presumably
Right.
that's going to leave, but it's a busy station for God's sake. Now he's got to
Who's
look
in
out for what
charge?
Quark's doing in the bar, what's happening at the
Who's
airlocks.
in charge?
It's all of it. And O'Brien's gone, so who's going to fix it when the replicators break?
I mean, there are red
No.
shirts, you know, the equivalent, just, you know, your background actors in various
Bajoran orange shirts running around.
Bajoran orange shirts. There's some Starfleet guys in yellow, which is kind of like your engineering operations guys. But there's no named individual, you know. Your man, Lieutenant Primin,
He's disappeared.
disappeared, never mentioned again.
O'Brien ate him.
Yeah, sure, why not? So nobody's in charge on DS9. That's it now. There's just Odo and his clipboard. Star Trek, man, it's unreal. You would not get away with this in any other world.
It's great.
But a great scene nonetheless. You know, great for the characters, great for the filming. Cat, take us on, because I've already lost myself. Where are we?
Right, we're in the cave system on the moon. A hand, and in fact, it opened on a hand close up to the camera, sharpening a blade.
Right. Yes.
And then the camera pans up to see
nice. Good camera
our away team are being walked into the cave by these mysterious, dangerous-looking peeps.
Yes.
And Golin Shelah, the leader of the Ennis, says, "Our first visitors, we're not all the same race," which is, he notices that. And Kira just says, "I'm a Bajoran." And then Sisko introduces everyone else properly by name and rank. Oh, Kira, you're such a nationalist, bless you. But
I mean, understandable.
You cannot blame her.
Exactly. Proud of who she is, where she's from, and a reminder as well. She's a Bajoran officer, not part of the Federation. It's important, I think, to remember.
Yeah, this is their bullshit. She and the Kai are being dragged along with it.
100%. Pulled into another one of your Federation anomalies, distress signals, crash ships, the same kind of bullshit Picard and his crew had to deal with every other fucking week. Presumably the Bajorans have had no experience of this previously, so I can understand she wants to distinguish herself.
But I think we've got an image of Shelah, who is played by the wonderful Jonathan Banks, who is known to most people as Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad, or as Buzz Hickey, the criminology professor in season 5 of Community. He's a very distinctive guy. He's got a fantastic deep voice, and does a lovely job as Shelah. So Shelah replies, "You know nothing of our home planet or the punishment." And that's just left hanging for a bit. We don't come back to that for a little while. Because Kira suddenly collapses. And Bashir moves towards one of the Ennis, who's played by Patricia Tallman, who plays Lita Alexander in Babylon 5.
I've got a great image of that. Let me just quickly pull that up. There she is, putting a gun in Bashir's chest. But yes,
she's got such an expressive face.
Yes,
love it to bits. Wonderful. Before we started, before we came online to me and Tim were talking about how she has no lines in this. She has some lovely little acting moments, and it's all carried out in mime because she doesn't have any lines, presumably because they didn't want to pay her the going rate for a speaking part. But yes, the medium determining the message again. So she starts digging through the medical case before handing it to Bashir, and he just grabs it going, "For God's sake!" and returns to Kira with it. And it's the second time I've noticed that Bashir has got a god in his dialogue.
I also picked up on that because we've talked about it before. This use in the ever unwritten, unspoken, but clearly post-religious kind of human culture, where religion is just, we've talked about it before, but religion is clearly not a major force in human society anymore. So it is interesting to hear it, but I wonder if it's more of a cultural holdover, because Bashir is clearly a British Indian, or in appearance cultural descent, so it's more maybe a cultural idiom, I wonder, you know?
I suspect that it's because they couldn't have anyone swear on screen, and saying God is the closest you can get to a hard-hitting exclamation. Right. So I suspect every time Bashir invokes God, he's actually invoking, "Oh hell, oh fuck, oh fucking cunt," and he's just got to say, "Oh God," because you can do that on American network television where you cannot use other swear words. But It would have been nice if they'd done something akin to what Firefly famously did, using Chinese
I loved that.
words wherever they. I like it. I do object to the fact that Firefly has no Chinese characters in the background, despite the fact that China has effectively colonized the galaxy. Fucking Joss Whedon.
Listen, there's a whole separate podcast there, and if you want to, we can take that on. You know, it won't take as long as DS9. That must be said, considering Firefly's very brief existence. But yes, some brilliant bits and some shocking oversights. I think it's very reasonable to think that the Chinese would absolutely be a major part of humanity's outflow from the solar system. To then not include a Chinese character is just so goddamn lazy. You built it up perfectly. Why would you fumble the ball at the last minute? We are segueing.
Firefly, not as good as people think. So, yes, Shalala says, I apologize for our cautious nature. If you hadn't realized, we're at war. And he explains that I think it is at this point, he describes that there are the Ennis, which is his faction, and the Null Ennis, the deadly enemies.
I think it was very intentional, actually, that they are clearly just like two sides of the same species or culture. I think
it's pretty much a return to that TOS episode where you've got where you've got two factions, one of which has white down one side of the face and black down the other, and the opposite faction have white on the opposite side of their face. They make a point in this script of saying that they cannot remember how the war began, what it was over, whether it was water, whether it was land. They just don't know. They only know that they hate each other now.
And they hate each other, and yet they are so similar.
It feels like such a Star Trek, or I put in my nose, it feels like a Doctor Who script. It feels like a very basic, we're going to learn something this week, children, about the horrors of war.
I wonder, there must be a TV tropes definition for that kind of crude cultural valley that you fall into where it is just so, I've got to admit, clumsily telegraphed that, we're not so different and yet we are locked in inexplicable war with each other. And
I've got a whole rant about this coming up, but I'll leave it for when it cropped up in my episode notes.
Fantastic. That sounds good. Let's save it for them because I'm keen to hear that.
But yes, we learn that they're all prisoners on the moon, that their leaders began a war ages ago. They no longer remember what the meaning was, but all of those who were fighting were put onto this moon as a punishment for fighting. And we'll learn a bit more about what the punishment involves later. Cisco asks where their doctors are, their medical staff, and they don't have any. And I've put down, Bashir's presence is explained.
Bing! Star Trek trope achieved.
We should start a bingo card at the start.
You know what? That's risky. What? Take a shot every time Bashir's there, just for the purpose of meeting a medical emergency.
Sip wine for fun, tequila for business. Every time we get no, we couldn't.
Well, we would not survive. You know, it would be a lot of fun, but my God,
we'll be going till 3 in the morning. You know what the problem is with Deep Space Nine? That was the real problem. Odo is naked all the time. His clothes are just his skin. How do they do that? I can
see his took every single time I've seen Odo. I've seen him nude.
And that's why we can't do a drinking game.
And that's why we cannot. It would be deadly, and we would not survive a week.
Yes, Cisco asks how the Ennis survive without medical personnel, and Shalala just kind of blithely talks past the point as best as we can, without explaining that they're functionally immortal, because we haven't learned that yet.
100%.
Bashir treats Kira with the tricorder, saying this will help your pain. And he says, Major, I'm so sorry. I would have done anything. And Kira has tears in her eyes, and she's looking to hold back sobs. And a single tear rolls down her cheek. And she says, and her voice is choked as she says, it's all so senseless. Opaka's always been a symbol of hope to me. Her words gave our struggle meaning, and now she's dead. Her life ends on some unknown moon. And for what? It's so bleak, and it's beautiful that they linger on that for a moment.
Again, it is, I think, part of that. You know, they're telegraphing, you know, the senselessness of war, and you know how innocents get caught in the crossfire and all of that. But it is realised so convincingly by a visitor's brilliant delivery, and you know. As we learn in this episode, Kira is obviously an experienced guerrilla. She's clearly seen war and death on many occasions. So for her, it's even worse because it is the one person, she looked up to, the old Bajoran culture looked up to, she survived the occupation, the Kai of the Bajoran people was such a central point. And it is that, you can immediately realise it. Oh my God, she's just died in an accident on a forgotten moon in the middle of...
The first time she's left Bajor in her life, and this is what happened.
Exactly.
You're right. I complained about them not picking up the thread of everything that Sisko would have to talk to the Kai about. But again, that was probably a decision to really strongly emphasise that connection that Kira had with the Kai. It would have been undermined had Sisko had a hugely important conversation with her earlier in the episode.
I think so.
So yeah. Sisko and Shala then approach Kira and Bashir. Sisko telling Shala that Dr. Bashir will give them any medical assistance he can, but they cannot take sides in the battle. And the Shala are going to protect them in exchange for Bashir's medical services. And the first thing that Bashir says is that perhaps he can train some of them in the basics of field triage, which I really like. That feels very real, rather than saying, oh yes, with the tricorder, I can restore some of them to full life. I can fix their limbs. No, I can train these people in how to take care of themselves after we've gone. That's what Doctors Without Borders do. It's what real people in the real world will do. And I loved that. It just felt so grounded. It felt very real, and it brought that theme of war. It's in keeping with it.
It is, and it is an escape from, I think, Star Trek's usual approaches, which is, do not worry, the Federation is here with our limitless resources, magical technology, solutions produced out of thin air, and reversing the polarity and bouncing the signal through the main deflector. This is actually, no, we can't just stay here and save everyone's lives. What we can do is impart knowledge to help people help themselves. I know it's a tired and trite catchphrase, but
it is what
knowledge.
You need to do. You cannot, we don't assume the Federation can stick around and save everybody. We've come to this remote place. We have to give them something lasting, and the knowledge of how to triage for wounds and care for each other is how they can do that.
In that one moment, DS9 has established itself different from TNG. We are outside the border of the Federation, more so even than DS9 is. We are so far from home, there is no way we could logistically support this scenario. So all we can do is give you knowledge. The most powerful tool there is, again, a trite, overdone catchphrase, but if we give you knowledge of how to treat injury, perhaps you can survive a bit longer. And it's realistic. And I think that's what this episode drives home, is just some harsh, realistic truths. So I enjoyed that moment.
Yeah, me too. And it speaks well of Bashir that's where his mind went, because he's a very flighty character. He's very driven by his libido a lot of the time. But when it comes down to medical field work, he knows what he's doing. There's a reason for him to be there. He's not just being hired as comic relief.
No, exactly.
And a moment after this, the Null Ennis arrive at the cave in an exchange of firing shoes. Shala is hit and goes down, as are more of the Ennis. And Kira, despite a shoulder injury, leaves her position of safety, does a dramatic roll sideways, and aims her phaser up at some rocks above the heads of the Null Ennis, and she succeeds in knocking 3 of them out with the rock fall. The others all retreat. And at the end of that scene, all of the Ennis lie dead or injured, and there's only Sisko, Bashir, and Kira standing up and walking among the fallen. Bashir goes to a man who is lying on the floor moaning. Sisko goes and checks the pulse of someone who he then determines is no longer with us. Kira crouches beside Bashir, looking down at the person he's treating, and then she looks and says, "Commander!" and points to a familiar silhouette at the entrance. Shadow. And it's Opaka in her distinctive veil and cap, just walking silently into the cave.
Dun, dun, dun. I was a bit surprised about this scene because I didn't realise how violent it was going to be. DS9 has kind of veered away from this kind of like protracted firefight sequence, so I was a little bit, wow, okay, they're really going for it. I've actually made in my notes it's like a Star Wars level fight. Just lots of people exchanging laser fire or phaser fire. And also it's interesting because I think earlier, God, I keep forgetting his name.
Shala.
Shala mentions you have a directed energy weapon.
You're right, and it says they've moved away from it. They don't do enough damage.
Which I thought was a brutal line. But then everybody rolls in and everybody starts firing directed energy weapons at each other. So I was a bit like, Okay, well, I
Yeah.
guess that was like, I mean,
Although
later
actually, I
on,
think throughout the episode is probably
later on
that
they,
the Null Edis used that, and these guys have got. We saw them sharpening a weapon in
yes,
the opening
exactly. So
scene.
they do come
Oh,
back.
yeah, you're
So
right. There are a lot of stunts in that scene. There is a lot of direct combat,
yes,
and we're seeing a lot of people die in that scene. We're shown that very
absolutely,
distinctly, which is really
absolutely.
rare.
It is. In Star Trek generally, and for DS9 definitely, I don't think we've seen this much outright death, since probably the Battle of Wolf 359. Uh, but a lot of phaser fire in close quarters is exchanged. And yeah, it's great because we see Shal Elar.
Shella.
Shelar, I don't know why I've got such a blind spot on that name. Shelar goes down, and you're like, wow, he was like a main character. I can't believe he's dead.
It looks like they're doing the Psycho thing. They've introduced a main character and they've killed him off very early on.
Wicked, love it. Forces you to restructure your, approach to the episode, and then suddenly there is that silhouette in the cave mouth. And I love it. And my notes say, "Sweet zombie space pope."
And
It's
yet,
a
I love that
Parker.
she doesn't speak immediately. She doesn't
Yeah,
call to them. There is a moment when you're left wondering, is this actually Opaka? Is
yeah,
it something else
it,
inhabiting Opaka's body?
exactly.
It's ambiguous before we cut to the adverts.
And I love that. I love that. It's such a Star Trek thing. You literally, it could be anything. It could be a hologram or a ghost or a Q or anything that you just would not understand. And it's great. It absolutely hoists expectations to a dangerous degree because you don't know what the hell's going to happen next. I wonder then if I could beg everyone for a comfort break. I could really do with
Too much
nipping.
wine, too much excitement. I also need to
This
go
is
and
the
get more
problem.
wine.
So I am going to put the stream on hold briefly. Kat and I shall retire, and we shall be back within a few minutes. So
We've
if we
got
could,
so much more to complain
we
about, guys.
really
Stay
do.
with us.
So this is it. The episode is cut to the adverts, and you are now going to cut to the adverts whilst we have a comfort break. So we shall return anon. Hello, everyone. Thanks for bearing with. We really needed that. It is the crisis of a live broadcast. Is Kat and I are obviously improving and just making it up as we go along, and we do need comfort breaks. We are only human, so
Only
thank you.
humanoids.
Only humanoids, bipedal sentience, or whatever,
Using that
whatever.
phrase from now on. But
So,
yes, Kai Opaka, who may be a zombie, may be possessed by something we just don't know yet, has turned up back in the cave, and we now come up on Bashir, Kira, and Cisco standing next to the seated Kai Opaka, and Bashir is taking her vitals, and apparently they are normal. And Cisco does the very sensible thing, asks Opaka if she's aware of what happened to her, and she describes remembering the surface of the moon approaching. She closed her eyes, she felt the impact and felt a wall of heat pass through her, and then nothing. And Cisco tells her that they pulled her from the wreckage and that she was not alive. And it's lovely. I looked up a script online just so that I could best transcribe some of the speech in the episode, and in the shooting script it says she considers this a beat, exploring her path for answers. The path being the Bajoran life force that's inherent to all sentient beings. I thought that was just really lovely when she looks away and is contemplating, she's searching her path.
I like that because again it is just such a small subtle acknowledgement of Bajoran culture. It's not telegraphed like, oh, look how different they are. It's just a casual thing that we would do culturally, and it helps build in the believability of this culture. So that's really cool that that's in the script. I really enjoy that.
Me too. Bashir then says that the tricorder indicates a biomechanical presence at a cellular level in Opaka's body, and it seems to be directly controlling her metabolic processes. And Cisco asks a few questions, and Bashir eventually just says, look, I'm sorry to keep saying it, Commander, I really don't know. It's plot relevant. It means that some information is held back from us, but it does also make sense that with just a tricorder on on an alien moon, the stuff he doesn't know yet about these biomechanical entities. At that point, Kira calls Cisco over to, and I've bracketed Patricia Tallman's character because she doesn't have a name.
Does she not even get a name? Oh, that is sad.
She might be named, so I haven't checked IMDb, but in the process of this script, they don't name her at any point. Who is waking from death. We then get an exterior shot of the runabout Rio Grande, which is the shuttle that Dax and O'Brien are aboard in their search for Cisco et al. And I've made note, once again, almost all the command crew have left DS9 to its own devices. Poor Odo.
What? Poor Odo. It is. I mean, last time we saw him was during the aphasia virus, and he was not happy at being the only senior staff member on the station. So, I sympathise. I've got to admit, I have a note that we cut to the runabout, and all I have is Dax and O'Brien in pursuit, lots of technobabble.
Yeah, I noted down that the warp eddy has traces of meson particle emissions, and by this they know that the traces they're following are from a Starfleet power reactor. And I like that in this episode we've returned to the concreteness of the technological investigations, which in Vortex was pretty much missing. It's very common that in DS9 the characters will point to the exact scientific process that tells them what they've been able to work out. It's very nice and it grounds it in the world, and it makes them sound knowledgeable. They don't always just what do? Revert power from I've had too much wine to remember how TNG resolves everything.
There is usually some kind of Star Trek resolution that involves rerouting main warp power through the main deflector. And you're right.
Thank you.
It is. Well, it is. It's just because it's such a trope. Sorry, I'm just going to flag out Trat again in the indoor cat. Our main engineering consultant is noting that my volume levels have been dipping because I'm trying to balance my sound here. So thank you very much, the indoor cat, for catching that. But I think we're back transmitting at full frequency, and I haven't had to reverse any polarities or adjust any shield harmonics. So
you're a miracle worker.
And it didn't take me 3 times as long as I said it would. But we will. Again, that is another Star Trek trip we'll get away from. Yes, the indoor cat, you can put that on your CV. I am more than happy to say that you are our engineering consultant. So, yes, they have a good technobabble scene. The only thing I would say is Dax and O'Brien, probably the best characters to have. That the science officer and the chief engineer, absolutely the ones who are going to just talk absolute sci-fi nonsense.
We're both accustomed to it, bless them.
Exactly, and credit to Terry Farrell and Colm Meaney. They're good at it. They are really good at delivering those lines with a straight face. So I'm glad at that. But we do cut back to, according to my notes, we are now back on Death Moon, which is not what it's called in the script, but I was trying to distinguish.
Again, I don't think we've got a name.
I don't think it ever gets a name, so I was trying to distinguish when we cut between locations where we are. So we're back on Death Moon.
Death Moon.
And Bashir.
Opaka is wrapping bandages around an injured Ennis, which is a nice detail as we come in. And yes, Bashir has found signs of the same biomechanical presence from Opaka's body in Shalah's body. So Cisco checks with Shalah, "You've died before?" Shalah confirms, "Many times, too many to count." And Bashir wants to try and get the computer up and running on the runabout, the crashed runabout, so that he can run tests and learn more about the phenomenon. And Shalah kindly says that he'll see to Bashir's protection if Cisco lets Bashir go back, because he'd like to know more about it himself, because the doctor is acting as if he's seen a miracle when everyone's come back to life. And they've been undergoing this process for so long that it's no longer miraculous to them. But he would like to know more about why it happens. And Shalah says that if Cisco had lived with it as the Ennis have, he'd see it as a curse. Cisco asks how long they've been there, and Shalah just says it feels like an eternity. It's all part of the punishment. And I noted here that we really have absolutely no signs as to how long they've been on this planet. We know that there are no children among them, so presumably they're not reproducing while they're there. But if they're being brought back at the same age each time they die, they could be decades, centuries old. There's nothing in their language that tells us that, because universal translator, and because they're an alien culture anyway, we don't know what their culture looked like hundreds of years ago to compare it with what we've got today. They're people out of time, so we have absolutely no idea how long the war has been waged.
I also wonder if these kind of nanomechanics are preventing them from aging as well.
Yeah, I suspect so, keeping them in the state at which they are
exactly.
right now. It's a good point.
So they are absolutely like this microcosm time capsule of their culture, and weirdly they've just lost everything. All they know is we are Ennis, they are null Ennis, and we hate each other.
Yeah.
That's all they have. Wild.
Yep.
But that's absolutely obviously what's intended. So,
Oh yes, there's a nice bit of conversation where Opaka asks Shalal what he hopes to gain by continuing the
yes,
war, and he says, vengeance.
vengeance.
All of us have seen our families suffer incredibly at the hands of the Null. And Cisco points out that the Null could say the very same thing. And then Kira pipes up, saying that they should fight more effectively. They had no guards at the door. There was no system to alert them to an attack when the Null Ennis arrived. And Opaka is watching her while she's saying this.
Yeah.
And Kira is very animated. She's talking quickly. She's walking back and forth.
Yeah.
She's insisting that the DS9 crew must defend themselves to stay alive. And Cisco shouts, I said, that's enough.
Yeah.
And she says, we have to be ready. And Opaka gently says, this is not your war, Kira.
That's it. As they say on TV tropes, that is the armor-piercing, well, statement in this case, not the question, but that's what it is. And once that is illuminating the background story of this, which is Kira and her experiences of war. That's what this is really focused on.
There could have been such a nice callback to Emissary, Ben being stuck in...
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah.
In Emissary, Cisco is constantly drawn back in his own mind to the scene wherein his wife died. It's where he goes. It's where, as the prophets put it, he lives here. He exists here. And Kira is existing in the occupation, in the war. She
100%.
hasn't left it, and it doesn't take much to trigger, in the full psychological trauma sense, all of her defensiveness and need to act. The urgency of it is still living with her in the same way that Cisco's thinking constantly on the death of his wife lives with him. But yeah, they don't have the time to pull back to that here. But yeah, they're doing that very effectively, showing that is where Kira is, and this is how it's been activated in her.
I can absolutely see it as all part of the same strand, and I think as you go through your DS9 rewatch, you will see that that is part of the wider DS9 story, which is people who come with their preconceptions and their baggage and their trauma and how they deal with it. And I would say that this is all on the same line. You know, it's going to pick up with other veterans and people with bad experiences like O'Brien. Who else? Like Dax, people who come with a lot of historical trauma that they've possibly not worked through properly. DS9 lingers on it, interrogates it, takes you back, puts you through it. And I'd never thought of it, but you're absolutely right. You've illustrated brilliantly that this ties in with that broader concept. So fantastic! I love that. I'd never thought of it like that, but yeah.
But yeah, it's there because the writers, it does feel as if they're very trauma informed. They know that is how people commonly respond to having lived through trauma, and they bring that into the script, which is a very bold move in an episodic sci-fi show in the 90s. I'm so glad that they've done it.
I am pleased to say that this is not the last time they will touch on things like this. So that's why it immediately feels like it fits, even if perhaps the writers themselves didn't quite realize that what they were going for. But yeah.
Yeah, it's fitting. It fits with the broad themes.
100%. Oh, love it.
But yes, Kira, Shalal responds to Kira that they used to defend themselves better, but when they realized that it was all pointless, they stopped defending themselves. He says, when you cease to fear death, the rules of war change. You'll understand that as the years begin to pass, Major. And Cisco is optimistic that they will be found within days or weeks. And at that point, he thinks that, well, yes, we could transport everyone away from this moon if that's what they would like to happen. And Shalal says, away from here, to live one life, to die in peace. To us, this is an ancient prayer that has never been answered, Commander. You would do this for us? And Cisco, of course, insists that they have to do it for both sides. They can't just take the Ennis with them and leave the Null Ennis behind. Everyone must cease fire, stop fighting for long enough to get everyone off the moon. And Shalal says that the leader of the Null would never agree to a ceasefire, but Cisco says they must at least try. So Shalal says he will talk to Zlanko, the leader of the Null Ennis.
100% he will. And I liked... I mentioned there was a bit of back and forth about how, trusting your enemy and, he'll never believe it. And it's just reinforcing that kind of idea that these people are locked in eternal war and that they are long past, seeing eye to eye, and it's kind of a bit of foreshadowing as well. But it's very good kind of concept building that this is a horrendous place, utterly prescribed by war, and also when Shala walks away, the camera pulls back and it's just that line of Kira, Cisco, and Opaka stood looking to the right with very kind of like pretentious expressions. Is the best I can say. Like they're like, this is a difficult situation. It's very weird, and we are, stuck on a planet where the only constant is war, death, and rebirth. Not a great place. So I kind of like that. That's a nice angle on them. I really like that into the scene.
Yeah, we do keep coming back to our characters and to their expressions showing us what they are going through at this point. Yeah. The Indok has just pointed out, I feel like Bashir wanted to go on this trip as part of his I'm doing medicine on the wild frontiers of space attitude from the first episode. I think you're right.
I think it absolutely is.
If he spends too long on the station and he's just been flirting week on week, he actually wants to do some medicine now.
Exactly.
To explore that frontier, which Kira very rightly called him
on the very first episode. Yeah, absolutely. But I think, as I said back then, it's a very clever, subtle reversal of that whole Star Trek, Starfleet aspiration. Explore strange new worlds. It's like, what if you get to the strange new worlds and the people there are just not ready for your bullshit? It's a strange new world to you, but I've lived here my whole life.
Strange to who, Federation?
Which is exactly and correctly what Kira calls out when Bashir turns up and he's like, yeah, the wild frontier, look at me. Oh, I could have had any cushy fleet job, but here I am out on the rough frontier. And she's like, excuse me, rough frontier? I live here. This is my home. This is no rough frontier. Okay, that is, once again, a very human-centric position, because Bajor is very much on the frontier compared to Earth, but compared to Bajor, Earth is a million light years away. Who cares what goes on Earth?
Yeah, by having the Bajorans there in the person of Kira, they do some nice deconstruction of that colonialist concept of what is normal, what is known. Space is known to Bajor and the Bajorans. Just because Bashir has never encountered it before doesn't mean that he is.
So I think you can very subtly read Bashir as like a very two-dimensional, aspirational Starfleet officer. What that actually means in the real world, the gritty geopolitics of DS9, it's a refreshing change. And as we will find out as well, and you've seen in TNG, it's the Cardassian Federation frontier. This is a horrendous hotspot in the galaxy. A war has been fought very recently here. It's left a demilitarized zone, a very contentious frontier. The people there are not happy with either side. It is a frontier, yeah, but for the people living there, it's home. And we've said we're not touching on any kind of contemporary conflicts.
Absolutely.
But DS9 is invoking, I think, a lot of those frontier conflicts, which will be familiar to viewers in the 90s, dealing with the breakdown of the Soviet Union, the redefining of borders in Central and Eastern Europe. It feels very, very now and relevant in a way that TNG often wasn't. So
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, TNG with all of its exploration, and they did use a lot of analogies for real human problems,
100%.
but they were happening out there. It was, yeah, it feels extremely different from Deep Space Nine, where they, as we've said many times before, they are sitting with the problems. They are there and they cannot just fly it. Well, in this episode, they've flown away into the wormhole and found more
yeah, absolutely. And they found a new problem on the other side of the galaxy. But, I think as well, we are aware the subtext of this episode is Opaka and Kira and the occupation. Bajor's cultural experience, its historical experience, its history of conflict, which is something we'll discover as the episode goes on. And I'm segueing us, so please, Kat, once again, hailing frequencies open, distress signal, rescue us, get us back on course.
Right, we are back on the Rio Grande, where O'Brien can't read a single M-class planet in the system, which tells him that if they've crash landed on any of those planets, they have not survived. Exactly. Bad times. Dax has said that the nearest star is putting out abnormal levels of delta radiation, making the long-range scanners unreliable. They'd have to do a survey of a huge number of planets, moons, and an asteroid belt. And O'Brien says, bloody needle in a haystack, which then gives him a flash of inspiration. And he thinks of a solution akin to using a magnet to pull out the proverbial needle. The runabout hulls are made of metallic composites that interact with magnetic fields. If they can send out a few probes to scan the system for those specific magnetic resonance patterns, then they should be able to find the runabout in the system if they can pick up a fluctuation in the hysteresis curve.
I love that phrase. And that's some excellent recollection of the technobabble. Well played, Captain.
God, I went and looked up hysteresis, and the Oxford Languages website has it as the phenomenon in which the value of a physical property lags behind changes in the effect causing it, as for instance when a magnetic induction lags behind the magnetizing force. This was written by a science consultant. It wasn't just anyone writing the technobabble on this show. They had scientists working on this bullshit. It's great. I feel really sorry for Colm Meaney for having to memorize it. But it's meaningful. It is science fiction and fantasy, but it's grounded in real science. It's wonderful.
I can also say that what the process it's describing is also something that happens in real life, because I know from my own nerdy reading of military history, what Colm's describing is what we call magnetic anomaly detection, which is the process by which sonar detects submarines deep underwater. Very carefully, you can pick up submarines by the effect they have on the Earth's magnetic field, because they're a big chunk of non-resonating metal. So this is mad. This is magnetic anomaly detection, as they call it. So it's a real process. So you're absolutely right. They must have used a true science consultant to source this episode. Awesome.
It's so cool. But yes, we now go back to the moon outside the crashed Yangtze Kiang. And I say Bashir is demonstrating strong tech nous by bringing the online computer back on board. Yeah, he's lying on the floor with a torch resting under his chin, facing upwards under the console.
I should have got a picture.
We've seen Bashir doing this before. It's not his job. He's a medical technician. He's fixing the onboard computer, but apparently he's got the technological capability to do it.
I know, I love that, and it is something that Star Trek does occasionally, is remind us that every crew member we see is a specialist in their field, but they've had basic training as a Starfleet officer, which apparently involves just ridiculous meddling with technology. And I wish I got a picture of it, because it looks great, and it's another great angle. You know, it's close in on a console, looking down. Bashir's got the torch on his chest as well, and he's fiddling.
And it's deliberately kind of very claustrophobic. It looks like a very tight space he's in, because he's on a crashed shuttle and things have collapsed around it.
An angle, like, you know, it's very angled. It's another great, very short but very visually appealing cinematography shot.
A lot of thought has gone into those few moments of him under the console.
I thought so.
It's delightful to see.
And it's great to see Bashir for once do something that isn't just like a tricorder and, you know, something about gene structuring or nanoprobes. He's actually getting his hands dirty. He makes the computer come to life. I think he actually congratulates himself.
He does. He says, "Nice work, Julian," because there's no one else there to say it. Bless his heart.
Okay, that's a little cringeworthy, I'm not going to lie, but yeah, you know what, credit to him, he does actually do something above and beyond his medical training, so credit to him.
And Shala now delivers news to Sisko that he's surprised, but Zlanko has agreed to listen to his proposals. They're going to meet at a neutral site near the runabout, and neither side will carry firearms to the site.
Yes.
Kira asks what if they use the opportunity to set a trap. And Shala reassures them that they've taken all precautions, but he offers that she can accompany them if she's concerned. But Sisko says that Kira will stay there with the Kai. And Shala replies very laconically, "What a shame," and walks away.
He doesn't have many lines, but I do feel like Shala is such a well-realized character. He's this great combination of sardonic and utterly, you know, done. And you know,
he's extremely world weary while being extremely aggressive when he is called to be. He does feel like a very deep character, and I think he feels perfectly realized by Jonathan Banks, who was the right actor for that part.
100%. perfect characterization, and just you wish somebody like that had been given more time and space to explore the character, but understandably, obviously, he couldn't in an episodic TV show.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, we have the conversation between Opaka and Kira.
I enjoyed this.
Opaka says to Kira, "You can't bury it, Kira." And Kira sounds sincerely confused with her. What? And Opaka says, "Do you not recognize yourself in all these people?" And she says, "What, me? Oh, no, not at all. They're content to die. I've always fought to stay alive. Oh, I don't want you to have the wrong impression of me, Opaka." And Opaka says, "Just what impression do you think?" She's doing good therapeutic talk here, just drawing Kira to say what is on her mind.
You have a great professional experience of this situation, which is one of the very many benefits you bring to this podcast. So
this is one of the irritating things that therapists do, though. It's just asking you, and what do you think about this? Until you get to the trauma. So
I understand why you do it, but yeah. I can see how that is.
When you can see a therapist doing it, it's annoying as hell. See, I don't want you to have the wrong impression of me, Opaka. And what impression do you think I have of you, Kira? And Kira says that I enjoy any of this. I don't enjoy fighting. Yes, I fought my whole life, but it was for a good cause, for our freedom, our independence. And it was brutal and ugly. But that's over for me now. That's not who I am. I don't want you to think this is who I am. This violent person without a soul, without a conscience. That's not who I am. And I've written again, I just love Nana Visitor's acting in this episode. She delivers all of her lines with so much conviction. I think in this scene particularly, she reminded me a lot of Liza Minnelli in Cabaret, a character who holds it together a lot of the time, has a lot of bravado on the surface. But when she expresses emotion, she brings it so strongly. It's absolutely. I actually went to look up whether they were related, because they both got dark-colored eyes and they both have that. Just the feeling about them. I think it's just a brilliant acting parallel. They both have that same. I can't describe what it is. Just a brilliant intensity and conviction.
Intensity is a great word for it. I couldn't speak to that, and I've got to admit I've never seen Cabaret, so
it's worth watching. It's a good film.
So I hear, and I will make the effort absolutely. But I agree. This is such a brilliant scene, and it is. I am pleased to say the beginning of many scenarios in which Kira Nerys has to confront violence as a mechanism to resist an occupier, and the rules of war, and all of this. And the creators of the show, bless them, realize that and will give her so much more. No more specific spoilers than that, but this is but the first in so many scenarios in which Nana Visitor, as Kira Nerys, portrays such a complex character, and it interrogates just these really difficult concepts like this. And this is brilliant, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. What did I say? Just it's such an overt interrogation of war in an episode which is war taken it to its most horrific extreme, a war in which nobody can die, and therefore everything is allowed and nothing is off the table. There was nothing but the constancy of killing. And that's it. And so it is perfect to throw somebody like Kira, who has spent, as she says throughout this episode, her entire life fighting. Well, what do you do when the fighting's over? And, we're always talking about how Bajor is, a heartbeat away from civil war collapse because it spent its entire political life fighting, occupation, and now the occupation's over, they seem ready to fight themselves. And so you put somebody like Kira, who is representative of the Bajoran culture, and Opaka, who is another representative of the culture, in one place and say, right, what does conflict mean to you? What are you without conflict? If we take that away from you, what are you? And it's a difficult question, and credit to the creators of the show for asking it.
God, yes. I'm really glad that they didn't veer away from it, because it's such a human problem, and it's such a perennial human problem.
And this is what good Star Trek should do is say, all right, okay, we've gone to the stars, but we're not that far in humanity's future, and war is still happening, and we keep running into people who are surprisingly like ourselves, who want to have a war. How do we deal with it in this supposedly idealistic utopian future? Star Trek's always been about oh, the Federation is a human utopia, an Eden, a paradise. Right, okay, but how does that work? We're running into people who aren't part of that. How do they react? How do they respond? How do we, as supposedly evolved, as ethical, post-human Federation officers, react to the challenges of a galaxy that doesn't share our advantages? Ooh,
Yeah.
TNG skirts around it. DS9 will run face first into that wall and just bam. Ooh, we have all this to come, Cat.
It's so exciting. There's so much to do.
There really is. But again, please keep us
But
focused.
yes, the next thing that happens in this scene, which the first time I watched it through twice, the first time I watched it through, I was a little confused by, I guess, Opaka. In the shooting script, it says Opaka looks at Kira with compassion, reaches out her right hand and touches her 2 fingers to the ridge of Kira's ear.
Yeah.
And at the touch, tears come streaming down
Yeah.
Kira's face. She chokes back a sob and moves into the Kai's embrace, burying her face in shame. And again, the ear is where the Kai can be in direct contact with Kira's path. It's where a Bajoran, certainly the Kai, will touch you to make contact with your inner self, your deepest emotions.
Right.
So when the Kai raises a hand to Kira's face, she's evoking that for her. She's bringing those feelings right to the surface.
100%.
And it's at that point that Kira starts sobbing and goes to embrace the Kai. And it's, again, an incredibly powerful emotion. Nana Vista just had so much to do in this episode, and she brings her full feeling to all of it. And Opaka goes on to say, don't deny the violence inside of you, Kira. Only when you accept it can you move beyond it. And Kira says, I've known nothing but violence since I was a child. And I love this next bit from Opaka. In the eyes of the prophets, we are all children. Bajor has much to learn from peace. And Kira, again, the actor's voice is choking at this point. I'm afraid the prophets won't forgive me. And Opaka says they're just waiting for you to forgive yourself. And it's, I've used the term trauma-informed already, but it really feels like it. The feelings of shame in people who have experienced trauma, and I think particularly who've experienced trauma as children, it's just such a common experience and such a devastating one. And trauma therapists will often invoke the inner child and encourage people to go back to their inner child, to contact that part of themselves, to recognize that that part of themselves is still active and here and helping to produce actions on the part of the person. We act from our inner child when we are experiencing high emotion. We go back to that deep part of ourselves. And yeah, it's a difficult task for Kira to do, to start focusing inwards. Her impulse is to look to these warring factions around her and to guide them, to start showing them how to fight better, how to fight more efficiently. And what she needs to do is look to her inner self and start the process of healing in a time of peace, which she doesn't know how to do yet. It's just so much encapsulated in that short conversation, and it doesn't feel inappropriate. It doesn't feel like space magic when the Kai does go to her path, which is a religious idea that we don't share directly, but it makes emotional sense that Kira shares that moment with her lifelong mentor. And it's just really beautiful. And it could have felt so out of place in a serialized sci-fi, but because there is so much good world building, because we know enough about Kira's past already, it doesn't feel jarring. It feels of a piece with what this episode is about.
Brilliant. Could not have put it better myself. Really, thank you, Kat. That is such a good read on the situation. And again, I'm going to chalk that up to your own professional and personal experience of psychology and trauma. 100%.
I don't usually talk about the subject while drinking wine, so I've been a little more repetitive and a little less coherent than I would sometimes like to be. But I'm not therapizing anyone here. It's all good.
100%. This is liberating. You know, we are not in a professional arena. We are interrogating a fictional show which, surprisingly enough, has really decided to tackle some adult concepts. And I am pleased to report we'll continue this theme throughout the show.
It just feels so mature compared with the space adventure of some previous episodes of Trek. It's so satisfying that the show exists. Damn it.
So glad you think so. I can't guarantee that Star Trek Deep Space Nine will always maintain this level, but they will always try to come back and ask hard questions about concepts that we take for granted in other fictional concepts and indeed in other parts of Star Trek. It will always turn the eye inward and go, well, okay, why? But why? But how does this work in an ongoing cultural situation? You know, we can't just be like, wow, Bajor was occupied by tyrants and is now free, hooray! It's always like
everything's happy again. Whoa, no, they're dealing with the real impact of what an occupation
100%.
does to a people, and that's it's an incredibly heavy thing for a science fiction show
100%.
to be doing. And I think this episode, because it touches on those themes, it feels so much more a legitimate episode than Vortex did.
Yes. Oh
Because
God.
Vortex
100%.
could have touched on these themes. It could have touched on the deep loneliness of Odo, and it just doesn't. The writer didn't manage to do that. But in this episode, it feels like a return to form. It feels like we're back with what is happening on DS9.
100%. I think because I don't think DS9, the creators at the time, had any idea what they had their hands on with setting the show somewhere static. Would shape so many of the stories and force them to confront things in a way that Star Trek never has before. To constantly return to things and go, okay, well, what does that mean? This is evolving, this is changing, but we're still here. These characters.
I think they had some inkling just from the way that they talked about it before, but the way the credits are formed, the way that you're circling a station rather than watching shuttles disappearing through the wormhole, going on adventures. It's the one place over and over and over. And I do think that's kind of written into the DNA of the show for the writers who see that. I think guest writers might not have known it so well and might not have tackled it as well.
That is the problem, I think, with any episodic show, is one writer's room alone just can't sustain that story. And eventually a good script editor will be able to piece that together, but Deep Space Nine involves that organically. So right now we're still kind of fumbling through the episodic structure that TNG would recognise, and there's also still, I would say, in the minds of the producers and some of the script writers and the network, do we just need to make TNG Part 3? You know, because TNG was like, how do we continue the original series story? You know, we need to keep that fan base, so do we emulate a lot of their storylines, or do we start our own? Deep Space Nine really went off on the deep curve, but I think always had it at the back of its mind, do we need to have that episodic structure of here's a new situation, how do our characters respond? And they are going to find their feet for the next few seasons. So it's difficult. It is difficult, and it will be interesting for you as a new viewer who has a TNG experience, how well DS9 does this.
Yeah, and it's interesting watching how, I think for the most part, they've meshed so well. The established crew, who they are, what their traits are, the way they talk to each other, that's so deeply written in with, that old style. This is an episodic adventure. We spend one episode with the Ennis and the Null Ennis, and we're never going to see them again. That feels very Star Trek. And I've got a rant coming up, which again I'll come to when I come to it, rather than skipping to it now.
Yes.
In which the episodic nature of it really determines what the story can do.
Of course it does.
But in the meantime, we are back on the Rio Grande.
Thank you.
It's 10 o'clock at night. We're back on the Rio Grande. Majel Barrett's voice of the computer tells O'Brien and Dax that 22 minutes into launch, all readings from the probes that they've sent out are within normal parameters. And just as O'Brien has been moaning that they might be light years from here and we wouldn't have a clue.
I love how fatalistic he is.
But Dax reads from Probe A, which is approaching Planet 3, which has one moon. It's experiencing a low fluctuation in the hysteresis curve. They're picking up a reading from the moon of the third planet, and they set their course. It's just, they scienced it, and they stuck with the science, and the science has sent back a response. It's good.
That is very TNG. I think I can imagine Data sat there, just very calmly reading off sensor readings that indicate an aberration in a certain field, and Riker turning to Picard and going, that sounds like a lead. That sounds like where they might be. You know, that kind of gut instinct and science that makes Star Trek Star Trek. So
I think, though, in this episode, I think in DS9 more than in TNG, we don't rely on a repository of previous information on how to do this. Data will... He often looks at the computer rather than bring it from his own memory bank, but they will look up previous instances of
Yes.
something similar happening. They rely on the Federation's knowledge to bring up solutions for them.
100%.
And while I don't think they often resolve a whole episode by doing that, they do it frequently. Whereas here, everyone's MacGyvering it every step of the way.
100%.
People come up with new solutions. They look at how things technically work and they fiddle with it and they find the new solutions for how they can discover things. And it's really nice. And it's all slightly faked science, but because it's grounded in nothing real science, it really feels like we're there. Again, we've kind of dismissed the idea of a frontier, but with these people they're discovering as they go along. They don't have this huge repository of knowledge, or they're not making use of it. They're discovering things for the first time. And in this episode, I think Miles invents 2 new processors.
He does. That's exactly what I was going to say. Dax says, "What the hell's a digital manometer or something?" And he's like, "I don't know, but I'll know when I've invented it." And I'm like, "That's a balls. That's a Scotty level kind of
it's daft
creativity solution." And it's
Cisco's
great.
gone missing. How are we going to find him? Let's build something.
Let's just MacGyver is a great verb for it as well. I love that as a verb. But he does. He MacGyvers a solution, which is in keeping with O'Brien, as you say, trying to keep a alien station together, integrating Federation technology. He doesn't have like the resources of the whole fleet to call on. He's got to literally make things work with bits and pieces he has lying around, and it's such a refreshing change.
I think my only complaint is that he's alongside Dax, who is a lot older than him, a lot more experienced, and sits there looking pretty while he comes up with all the solutions.
I hadn't thought about
Sitting there like a pretty old man.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, and that is my failing as a
There's so much to focus on in the episode, but I think I was enjoying the Miles monologues, but they were monologues. It's one of those examples where they've got a second person there just so that the person with stuff to do has someone to bounce off and to say it to. Because he could have stood there by himself going, "It's like a needle in a haystack. That gives me an idea." It's more realistic if you've got a second body there.
Of course,
and I fear that's what. I bet it. More generously, it might have been that Terry Farrell famously didn't like having to memorize the technobabble. Maybe they gave her a week off. Maybe they said,
I would like to believe
this week he's had a few weeks off while his wife was visiting her mother on Earth.
That's right.
Let's give all the hard work to Colm, and you can just sit there and nod occasionally.
Bounce things
so
off.
Maybe it was a blessing for her rather than patronising.
I would like to think that, because I would believe any of the words that the chief says, Dax could easily say. We've established previously Dax is a brilliant scientist, an accomplished engineer, multiple lives. There's no way Dax wouldn't know all of the things that the chief knows. And we've established in previous episodes she's a good engineer. She knows how systems work.
She is, but she doesn't produce any of the results in this episode. It's all done by O'Brien, which I only notice it because it stands out as being unusual in Deep Space Nine.
I would agree. I think you're absolutely right. I have one line on this whole scene, which is just classic Star Trek sequence of analysing sensor readings and coming to a solution. And then I'm on to the next scene, so please take us away, Kat.
Back on the Yangtze Kiang, Bashir emerges from the crashed shuttle. The Ennis are approaching from their cave, and the Null Ennis from the opposite direction. Cisco approaches, and Bashir tells him that the computer is up and running and processing the data on the microbes now, but he can already confirm that the microbes are artificial, rather like nanites in a way. I think we've met nanites just once before in a TNG story, Evolution, where Wesley accidentally released them into the ship and they evolved and started draining power sources.
Excellent memory, yes.
Cisco tells Bashir that he has promised to transport the people off the moon, and Bashir, it's a lovely Bashir moment. He grinned and said, "Isn't that rather like assisting a jailbreak?" And Cisco is just dead.
Love it.
He says he doesn't need Bashir to interpret the Prime Directive for him. Whatever crimes they've committed, they've paid for 100 times over. They've been altered and abandoned by their world. I believe that the Federation would recognise them as separate and unique. And Bashir's grin just falters. And it's clear that his boyish enthusiasm, his zest got ahead of him when he made the joke about the jailbreak. And he just says
Credit to the actor.
I really like that about Bashir, that he has a fantastic scientific mind and is like a new graduate. He's overexcited. He's not diplomatic in any way.
Perfect example. I like that.
Yeah, and I love that they keep bringing that back for him. It's not 2 episodes in and now he's a hardened space marine. He's a real person and he'll evolve gradually over time. And it yeah, it is partly probably they'll have a Bible of DS9 from which the writers have to work,
yeah,
but it feels real that it evolves slowly. He hasn't just learned his lesson the first time Cisco told him stop doing that.
Stop doing that. Yes. Also, I've got to ask, what did you make of Cisco's reaction in that situation? Because I thought he came down hard on Bashir, but I think he was right to focus on that and be like, listen, you are basically saying we are violating the Prime Directive, General Order 1, the integral rule that defines Star Trek. You know, Kirk, Picard, Cisco, Janeway will deal with it. They will all deal with this. So I think that while Cisco came down very hard on Bashir, he was right to do it.
I think it emphasizes his position as commander that he has to have that overview. He's looking back to what the Federation insists must happen in these situations, and he has already thought about the ethical problem of the fact that we do not punish people in this way, that they do not deserve to be left here like this. I think it's a nice blend of Cisco's own ethics and his authority. He has the authority to say, we are going to save these people. It's a decision I have made. And yeah, it's frustrating to have someone as puppyish as Bashir around going, breaking him out of jail. It's like, no, this isn't fun. Actually, this is a deeply serious situation, and we're going to take these people out of here.
Exactly my reaction. I've got to admit, where Cisco says, you know, these people are paid for their crimes, my impression was actually the punishment is dreadful. It's the worst punishment I could imagine. You know, I mean, we think, you know, obviously the death penalty is a dreadful punishment.
But to have no end to your suffering.
No end. Literally, we will kill you over and over and over again for your crime. I mean, that is monstrous. And I immediately think that Cisco's interpretation, which is this is wrong on every ethical scale, is 100% right. And it is a difficult decision to make, but we must remember, as you say, Commander Benjamin Sisko is the Starfleet commander on the scene, and he is granted broad latitude by the Federation, by Starfleet, to interpret those rules on the scene as he sees fit. He is the ultimate authority, and whilst he might have to clarify it later to his superiors, right there and then there is nobody else. He is the ultimate arbitrator, and therefore he has to act with incredible detachment, moral certainty. It is that, I think, is one of the most integral and curious stories of Star Trek, which is to put somebody very far away from authority, make them the ultimate authority, and give them a horrendous moral situation to solve. And I think that's why Ben Sisko in this scene is the most Ben Sisko I've seen him like in a while. He's like, I am really on my own out here. I'm making a really serious moral decision, like really phenomenally significant, and I'm going to take this really phenomenally seriously.
Yeah, and I think for the first time in a few episodes, he's very alone in his decision making. Ben Sisko is very good at having warm conversations with his colleagues about what is going on for them. In this episode, his colleague is misconstruing the situation. His other colleague is in a cave talking to her Kai about the trauma of war.
He is alone.
Yeah, he's alone. He's far from the Federation. He's got to make his own decision here, and he does it. And yeah, he asserts that authority to do that. And he's got to remain diplomatic with Shala and Zlanko when he turns up. So yeah, there's a bit of his frustration expressed at Bashir here, as well as just explaining where Sisko's character is at in this moment.
Which is so key to his story, his evolution, his development as Ben Sisko. I loved it. I just think it really cemented the character in my mind as he can have those warm conversations when he can, but if you put him on the spot, Ben Sisko is just phenomenally something else. Professional, just really daunting. I loved it. So brilliant. Thank you.
A moment later, Zlanko approaches Sisko, Zlanko being the Null Ennis leader, and Sisko tells him about that he is the commander of a Federation space station, and it's at this point that he explains the Federation, that it's made up of over 100 planets who have allied themselves, but you remember this really well, mutual scientific, cultural, and defensive benefits. But he then describes, he says, the mission my people and I are on is to explore the galaxy, which... It's not only not the whole story, it's not even true. Their mission, their primary mission, is to maintain peace on Bajor, is to to support, is the Federation
Yes,
supporting
those.
Bajor to redevelop, and it's and secondarily holding that outpost just outside the new wormhole. Sisko
But
hasn't been tasked with exploring space, but it's a good explanation to give to Zlanko to explain why they are there.
yes, and it's a tricky one, that, because yes, I agree that Sisko's primary objective, given to him by Captain Picard no less, is to ensure by whatever means Bajor CA is safe and is ready to be inducted into the Federation. But beyond that, I would say we mustn't forget that Sisko is a Starfleet officer. And he has been trained to be in this situation. That's what we were talking about previously. That he will be put in scenarios where he has to be the sole representative of Federation law. At our peril, do we forget the intro to TNG? Explore strange new worlds. Take out strange new life and new civilizations. I think, yeah, Sisko has a day job, which is looking after Deep Space Nine and Bajor, but he is still, at his heart, the same as Picard and Kirk, Janeway, all of his contemporaries, Starfleet officers. I think primary goal is exploration. So I do think
But we have established that the difference between this show and the others is that they're not out exploring. They're not constantly traveling away to strange new places. They're stuck in the one place, and he is maintaining. Is it Vishnu the maintainer? I'm trying to remember which of the Hindu gods it is. There's a creator, a destructor,
You'll know better than me.
I think I learned it from a Bill Bailey show. Oh God, but
No,
yeah, it is different. And
right.
actually, the opening I don't think we've alighted on this before. It's the first opening credits that doesn't have a captain giving a log entry over the top of it.
That's a very good point. It doesn't.
Nobody introduces DS9 with, this is why we are here, and this is our mission, to boldly stay in one place where many people have been before. And I'm guessing that's why they didn't do it. But yeah, we don't have a mission statement at the start of every episode. We've just got the place.
You're absolutely right, actually. Yeah. And I think
13 episodes in.
They've tied themselves in knots a bit with that. Well, it is the conundrum of Deep Space Nine. It's Star Trek, but they don't go anywhere. But they do sometimes, and then they have Star Trek stories, but sometimes they don't, and they don't.
And it does feel like, especially in these early episodes, it's that pull between what Star Trek has historically been and what it can become, and how much they want to carry with them, how much they want to push back against the status quo. And it's interesting watching it form in this way and seeing these early episodes. And I am excited to see what comes later and see how typical or atypical these early episodes are, how well they fit the overall vision of the show as it develops. It's exciting new ground. There is a parallel between what we are doing here watching Deep Space Nine and what the people on DS9 are doing.
That's a really good point, actually. We absolutely are. And I would say, for you and benefit of the chat, that is why this podcast, I think, stands out from others, in that we have someone who's watching Deep Space Nine who has not seen it before and only has TNG and the movies, and I think some
and a fuck ton of memes on Facebook,
which it should be seen as very skewing and non-representative, as funny as and relevant as they are. But yeah, this is where I want to hold back and let you absolutely experience this, because your perspective on Deep Space Nine is going to be so different from mine, because of what I've seen and what you've seen. They are so different. So you are absolutely right, and I'd never thought of it like that. That actually Deep Space Nine does not engage with Star Trek in the same way that any other series does, because they are all about going out and exploring. Deep Space Nine is stuck in one place. Damn, that complicates things so much in a really exciting way. Brilliant, Kat. Well put. Please keep us pushing forwards.
Right, Zlanko's what Sisko's told him what the Federation's mission apparently is. And Zlanko replies, such a noble purpose. There'll be no reward for our release, And Shala chips in with, being a fool as usual. And Zlanko counters with, a fool always manages to outwit you, Shala, as I've proven over and over again. And then Sisko starts doing a speech at them. And I think this is one bit of direction that didn't work so well. That Avery Brooks walks up and down, but he walks forward and backward on the stage rather than right to left. The camera doesn't follow him. He is speaking to the whole assembled group to explain to them why they need to listen to him, why they need to be peaceful just for now. But because I think this is an artifact of them not having a big crowd of people to gather around.
There's like
They couldn't have had him walk across
4 or 8
the
people.
stage and have lots of people standing around him, unless they were going to run behind the camera and pop up anew. So I think
that's a really good point,
I think the awkwardness of this framing is because they didn't have that many side actors. They didn't have many people stand around. So
It's not a massive
for
cast.
me, when he's walking up and down, he's speechifying. He's talking as if to a large crowd of people. There isn't a large crowd of people on screen. It's just him walking up and down a sound stage trying to look grandiose.
With like 3 people on one side and 4 people on the other.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, unfortunately, it gives the impression that he is being excessively grandiose in his delivery, when actually he's trying to give the impression that he is persuading a large number of people who are not actually there. So it's unfortunate.
Okay. Yeah.
But
I see that.
It's at this point that I warned Tim earlier. I've got a whole rant incoming, so we've probably covered some of it already. But I've had wine. Tim, you can edit this later, yeah?
I can if I feel it's necessary, but I very rarely do, because everything so far we've said has been golden. So, Kat, I want to hear your undiluted thoughts, please.
Okay. Cisco speaks to the people around us. I've actually really speeches the people around him. If you've had enough of suffering, then make them stop. I'm not here to be a mediator, but if you ask for an alternative, I'll give you one. And at this point, I felt that the whole way that the story is set up, it's a patronizing idea. The notion that 2 factions, knowing that none of them can die, nonetheless choose to continue killing one another for countless years, feels absurd. And it's meant to look like a ridiculous choice, which they persist in making. But we're also meant to take as read that these simple people cannot do any better. They can't see beyond the fighting, even after decades or centuries of experiencing it. And in most real world warring factions, there are new generations who are given the same kind of propaganda, the same messages that their parents and grandparents were given. But there aren't any children here. This is literally the same individuals encountering the futility of war again and again and again and again, and not changing. And I just thought a far more interesting story would have been to have met the same people having set up a peaceful settlement, which started the same way that the Ennis and the non-Ennis did, and resulted in their cooperating to their mutual benefit. We could still have had Kai Opaka dying by accident with impact on their moon. We could have had a huge amount of tension, as the locals would refuse the medical help because no one can die here.
Yes.
They wouldn't have taken her death seriously. Kira et al. Would have been mortified. I mean, why won't you help her? What are you doing? She's going to die. We could still have had that tension. And then it would have swung round to, of course she's still alive. We knew that she would be. This is how our culture started, and this is how we persist, and this is how we learned to move beyond war. And Opaka could have stayed there and learned that from them. Opaka, who comes from a war-torn planet, could have learned something from these new people, but instead, she is the space pope. She brings her inner peace and all of her wisdom to these poor, innocent natives. And I'm actually not going to read all of it, but I came around to the fact that every new race that we've encountered from the wormhole, they're all foolish in one way or another, everyone we've met so far. And the Federation has the noble aim of making contact with these new species, and they only want to gamble or to hunt each other for sport or to keep killing each other in unending conflict. And I think that this is an artifact of the episodic nature of the show. We have to encounter a new species very quickly. They have to be high concept, very simple in their outline so we can understand what their motivation is. Their story has to be wrapped up, and they have to leave again within 40 minutes. Wow. So we don't get to see it through. We don't get to see the fullness of a fleshed out culture and nuanced individuals. We get caricatures of every new race that we encounter because it's episodic science fiction. So I really hope that this is going to be a teething problem with DS9, because we've got the Bajorans who we'd met previously in TNG. We know that the writers want to and can create a nuanced, complex culture that has freedom fighters and an established religion and people who want different things. They're not just one unit who all want the same thing. But yeah, week to week, we've encountered these caricatures of aliens. And I think that's what's happened again here. It's a very standard sci-fi concept. And it's simplistic to the point of being patronizing, and it doesn't ring true for me. Why the fuck are these people still fighting? But yeah, I think it's because of the nature of the beast, and we haven't quite moved into a non-episodic science fiction show, which it can become, and I hope it will. So that was my rant about this episode and what it says about where the writers were coming from, and the nature of the Federation comes in with all its sensibleness, and we judge the aliens and then they leave.
Yes. Oh, wow. I mean, conceptual atom bombs have been dropped, and I think some very, very unforgiving but very accurate calls have been made. All I can say is that your observations are completely correct, and I'm sure chat will agree with me, and people who view this on YouTube later will say, yes, that is very familiar, and I wonder if that also kind of bears out your experiences from watching TNG.
I think I haven't sought to analyze TNG in the same way.
Okay.
But there is very much, we've identified in this podcast, TNG, they swoop in with all of their learnings and all of their infinite replicated resources. They solve a problem and then they leave again. And that's been replicated in the way that new races from beyond the wormhole pop up for one episode. We either resolve their problems, or usually in Deep Space Nine, actually, we've watched them playing out who they are, and then they leave.
And then they leave.
And nobody has changed. Strangely, they've met strange new cultures, and we haven't learned anything useful from them. They haven't taken anything away from us. We haven't accepted the clonpeaks that they've offered.
That is a very accurate observation, and I'm going to acknowledge the indoor cat in the chat there saying that we are having a different experience to them, as they have binge watched and watched a rapid series of episodes close together.
Absolutely.
Whereas Kat and I are watching every couple of weeks.
There is definitely something of when I dwell on an episode and look at its script and how it's been constituted, the second time I watch it through and I make notes, I am far less forgiving than the first time.
Of course you are.
And there's also something of, because I'm watching it at this point in history, from my position in the culture, I'm left-leaning. Over the last 10 years, I've seen Black Lives Matter and many Black activists talking about the recontextualizing of our history. I'm more aware of the role that colonialism has played, and the
100%.
bad role that colonialism has played in the world. And in the 90s, I wouldn't have watched Deep Space Nine and thought, it's the fucking Federation being a bunch of white people going out as the wise ones, trying to spread their wisdom among the warring peoples that they encounter. I probably wouldn't have seen that. It was there to see, but I didn't have the knowledge then. And even if I'd been this age, I might not have had the knowledge then. I have this knowledge because of where I sit at this point in history. So there's that huge cultural difference between me and the general viewing audience in the 90s. So it's not that I know more than they do, it's that I know differently because I've been exposed to very different information.
I think we talked about this very, very early on in the podcast, which is that we would make a conscious effort not to judge DS9 on the standards of the day it was made, but also taking into account the fact that we have obviously this additional knowledge and the context of contemporary society that just would not apply to, as you say, a casual viewer watching DS9 at the time. There are wonderful subtexts and bonuses we can enjoy in DS9 that reward the intelligent viewer in about 93, 94, 95 that just fall flat or don't apply anymore.
But I do think that even as a program being made in the 90s, it's progressive. I think even by today's standards, there are things that DS9 seeks to do that lots of similar adventure shows do not seek to do. It's not shying away from the evils of humanity. And it does touch on colonialism. The writers were aware of this. When that argument that Bashir, Kira has with Bashir when he raises that idea of the frontier. The writers bring Kira back going, no, that is not how we view the world. DS9 aims to oppose Western centrist centrism, sorry.
Yeah. No.
And
Yeah.
it does it really effectively. And yeah, it's an interesting discussion to have about where, as someone from where I am, I feel that it has fallen short. Or in this case, I do think it's an artifact of the nature of the program that they have to introduce people quickly and take them away again as quickly. And because they hadn't produced something of this nature before,
Yes.
they probably didn't see that that was what was happening, because that's just standard stock for Star Trek. So I do anticipate that as it goes on, it's going to change, because the writer's desire and the writer's scope is so much greater than that. So it's, yeah, I certainly don't wish to condemn the program. It does so much.
No. But at the same time, we are basically analysing this as a podcast, as viewers in 2024, looking back at a show that was made 30 years ago, but with the aspirations of creating a show that would form part of a legacy they knew would live on till now. So we can analyse it still critically now, and I think you are right in picking up that it is very ambitious for a show of its time, of its contemporaries, of its legacy, but we can also point out when it falls short and falls into the traps that sitcom situational drama had in the early 90s. And I think there's nothing wrong with holding up both of them simultaneously and going, here's where they worked, here's where they didn't. It doesn't take anything away from DS9 or
Definitely
Star
not.
Trek.
But I think I don't want it to appear that I'm saying they could just have done it this way and that would have been better. Why didn't they? because these were incredibly intelligent people living at a time when the discourse that I have access to was not available yet.
I think we need to take it as read that discourse now exists, and we are analysing DS9 and always acknowledging, it was made a long time ago in a very different cultural, social scenario, and we will just do this. We will always acknowledge the difference and the dissonance when it occurs, and just go, well, look, we said in the setup that we will just have to acknowledge when it was when it flags up that it was made in a very different time with very different values and context, and the counterbalance is this situation will always happen because DS9 does constantly push that boundary, and it will never stop looking at things about colonialization. The wine's creeping in a bit there, but it does it in a way that no other Star Trek franchise has done. There are some episodes coming up where it will lay bare the Federation's approach in a way that I've never seen any other Star Trek franchise do. A brilliant way. I'm going to say it now, and I'm going to tread very carefully here, but it passes what I would call the Alien Bechdel test. And I know it's a very conceptual, loose term, and I know Alison Bechdel is like, look, I came up with it as a gag for a webcomic, please don't take it seriously.
But as a heuristic, as a rule of thumb, it's surprisingly useful for pointing out where things fall short.
Exactly. And in the Star Trek context, two non-Federation alien members discuss the Federation. What it's like to be not members of the Federation from the outside looking in, and they discuss what the Federation is like, and they are not complimentary. And they are right in how they describe Federation values and how they impact the rest of the galaxy. And I'm not going to get any more into it because we will come to it and you will have such a wonderful reaction to it when it happens.
I love that the writers will be willing to go there because there is such an unwritten rule that the Federation is us, the viewing audience, is with the Federation. This is our side versus the aliens if they are against us.
100%.
So yeah, to critique that and to have to step aside from the Federation and look at it from the outside is radical. That's great.
And it's hard to do. It will come. I'm just seeing on the chat there, the indoor cat is talking about a famous scene. I think they are referring to the exact scene I'm referring to. No spoilers. Spoilers. There we go. No spoilers. We will get to it. But
yeah, she's saying there's a very distinct Nietzsche vibe to DS9 that I got starting even in the first series in terms of the banality of evil.
We have got some things coming up in season 1 that will blow your socks off, but we can't
Oh my
look.
God.
We are 2.5 hours into this episode. We're not at the end. We've got to press on, Kat. We've got to press on.
The show less, damn it.
Suffice to say that yes, look, you are raising some really painful points that will be interrogated later on in DS9 in a way that no other Star Trek franchise does. We're going to cover those points. We will. It is up to you as a new viewer to decide whether or not they hit home. We shall see. But
meanwhile,
we
everyone
must.
is gathered around the Yangtze Kayang.
Yes.
Zlanko thinks that the plan to transport everyone off the moon is an Ennis trick. He doesn't know this alien, Cisco, but he knows how Shalar's mind works, and he thinks that it's a trick to bring all of the Null Ennis out of the open to be slaughtered by the Ennis. And Shalar laughs deeply, and at this point, the facade just drops. Says, do you think I would let a single Null escape this planet alive?
Oh.
And Slanko replies, no more than I would let an Ennis go free. And the actor spits at him, and it's a huge fucking gob of spit. Yeah. It's not just
I noticed that.
Like, damn, someone's going to have to clean that up later on. Oh, it's very real. Good on him, but gross.
Grim, very grim.
And at that moment, I think I missed the first time round. It is effectively Shalar. Everything he said to Cisco has been a lie. He wanted to draw the Null Ennis out, and he has no intention of letting any of them get out alive at that point.
You know, I've got to be honest, I wasn't 100% sure. I don't
It does feel ambiguous, doesn't it? Because they seem sold on the idea of being able to escape, and whether he's just in that moment, whether the situation of standing opposite his enemy brings out his, of course, I'm not going to suffer you to live, or whether it's that was his plan all along. It is ambiguous.
I will leave that. I will leave that up to the viewer. I think you can read it either way, and it will not take away from this episode.
No,
I'm
definitely.
honestly not sure. I'm on the fence. I do not know, and I think that is a credit to it. It shouldn't be clear. It should not be clear.
But yeah, they all fall back to fighting again. At this point, I think they're all fighting with bladed weapons rather than with.
They are. It's a proper classic Star Trek. Oh God.
I love that music so much.
Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. You know, it gets used in Futurama when they parody Star Trek. Everybody knows. Every sci-fi fan knows the arena, Amok Time, you know. The Lurpers, it's time to go. But loved it. Great fight sequence.
It's lovely. There's a lot of stunt acting going on there. It's very intense. The camera work is great. It's a really good fight scene. But ultimately, it's got that futility to it. Everyone's going to kill each other. Bashir leaves but there's a great moment when Bashir leaves the runabout, and with a flying leap, he knocks Cisco to the floor just before an axe-like weapon aims towards Cisco.
Yes,
and Bashir says that we can't afford to die here, not even once. And I'm like, because that's so unusual. That's. Did you even need to say?
But it's such a brilliant line.
They don't really play with the idea, but until this point, there is the possibility that one of them could have died, and that would have been fine because everyone's fine. You die, we live, we die, we live again.
Exactly. Decades before that became a cultural phenomenon. Can I just make a note? When Bashir emerges from the runabout and the hustle's going on, and Cisco's done a proper like Shatner style, you know, punch. Double hander back on the neck. You know, he really hammers one guy. And I've got a note here that Bashir does a Mr. President and bodies Cisco to the ground to save him from an assassination attempt. And I love it. It's so corny.
Parallel, yes.
But it is such a save the commander, you know, really cheesy, but I love that. And it's such a good line.
Nice at the moment. It hammers home the urgency of we thought that we could die here and it would be okay. We know it's not okay now. Get the fuck down.
Actually, you know, this is the third act, you know, revelation. We thought we were all immortal here. Turns out, dun dun dun.
Yeah, but again, we don't know exactly what the intricacies of that are yet. It's left hanging for a while as we return to the Rio Grande, where O'Brien has spotted the artificial satellites above the moon. Dax says that the sensors have picked up some life forms on the surface, and some of them might be human. She smiles when she says that she's glad that they might have found them.
I love them. They're my favourite.
Oh, my love feels like such a goth thing to be so cutting about. Humans, yay!
Yeah.
Anyway, when a satellite starts scanning them, rather than I think that Kira and Cisco held orbit, but
Curious.
O'Brien takes them straight out of it. He rises above to
Yeah,
a
he
higher
does.
orbit because he theorized that the satellites might have something to do with the other runabout going missing. They've got prior knowledge, so they don't engage with it. There's a magnetic induction field blocking out 99% of transmissions to and from the surface. Dax asks if there's any way to get communication through the field. And O'Brien grins and says, well, I have 1% to work with, don't I?
He has
Dax
some
just kind of goes,
great lines, you know.
It's
Again,
great, but it's all on O'Brien. You've got Dax just sitting there being,
yeah,
what are we going to do in this situation? Well, I'm going to come up with a solution. Babe, don't worry. It's just a bit.
It could have been so much more collaborative, you know.
Exactly, yes.
Tom's
So
great.
I do wonder whether maybe Terry was having an off week and didn't want to have a lot of lines to learn.
Sure.
Maybe she's got a lot coming up in the next episode and they just kind of decided to let off for this. I don't know. But yeah, it's a bit frustrating to watch. Yeah, I wrote the writers of this episode are unafraid of playing the Miles O'Brien is a literal genius card in this episode. He just keeps performing miracles. Scotty is reborn.
Exactly. And you know what? That was fine for the original series, but actually, DS9 has bravely explored the territory that, you know, Dax is a brilliant scientist. Maybe she would know what to
And
do in
she's
this
many
situation.
generations older than Miles. She would have something to contribute.
100% she would, you know, so it could have been a great back and forth. You know, Miles could have gone, damn, yeah, that's really difficult. And she's like, actually, I think I might have an idea. There might be 1% I can play with.
I could have
You
drawn the
back and
two characters
forth.
together as, yeah, absolutely. But instead it's just Miles fucking monologuing and Dax occasionally doing a facial expression. It's a bit weak. It needn't have been. We're back on the surface of the moon. All of the fighters are dead again. Bashir says that once the microbes have restored a body after death, that body becomes permanently dependent on them for all cellular functions. And critically, the microbes were designed to be environment specific. They only work on this moon's surface. So anyone leaving the moon after dying there dies in real life.
If you leave the moon, you die in real life. I love that. Nice.
And Cisco then realizes that this includes the Kai, who traveled down there with them and subsequently died. O'Brien manages to contact them from the Rio Grande. They can't beam up the crew yet until O'Brien has found a way to do it without the satellites attacking the shuttle, so he'll be in touch again when they've worked it out. And just nuts and bolts wise, this gives the characters who are still on the moon a few minutes to talk through their situation before they're beamed up.
Yes.
And Cisco says, we have to talk to the Kai. And in the background, all of the soldiers are gradually picking themselves up and wandering off. And quite nicely, they don't just keep fighting, they kind of just shuffle away to their own places.
Yeah, I like that. It's like, okay, I died this time, so that's me out of the game. I don't know how they rationalize it themselves. But
I think it's just a kind of, there might be an unspoken, we have recovery time and then we fight again. We can't just keep stabbing each other every time we wake up. That'll get tedious. But yes, back inside the cave, Cisco tells Kira and the Kai that neither side took the ceasefire seriously. The Kai says she's not surprised and that Kira was right. They don't know how to do anything but die. They've forgotten how to live.
Yes, I made note of that.
Yeah, it's just a nice philosophical turn from the show. And when discussing how we would present this episode, we talked about how it doesn't just log on there. It is not an analog for any real Earth conflict at all. No. This mechanism of everyone coming back to life every so often, it doesn't bear any reality with real war. It's a very specific sci-fi setting. So it doesn't feel too preachy. I think that Opaka says they've forgotten how to live. They need to learn how not to war with each other. I think there is meant to be a broad analogy with people who fight for no reason. But when it's not an intergenerational conflict, it's too different. You can't discuss it in the same terms. It's too specific and it's just a bit too simple.
100%. I think if anything, they were trying to draw a parallel with Bajor, you know, which had spent generations, you know. I forgot the exact date, but it's about 20 or 30 years that Bajor's been occupied by the Cardassian Union.
But even then, the Cardassians are an occupying force. It's not two equal forces who don't remember how this war began.
Exactly. It's meant to be more framed as a personal story. If you've spent your whole life, Kira, fighting, just fighting, what else is there? And I think that is the clumsy parallel they're trying to draw.
Yeah, it's a good psychological message for
That's
an
what it is.
individual rather than a look at how what actually impacts a society. Yes,
Exactly,
you're right there.
exactly.
That's what they're doing, looking inwards. And before Cisco tells his assembled crew that Opaka can't leave, she boldly says, "I'll be staying here, Commander. This is the answer to all of the prophecies of my life." She still doesn't tell us what those prophecies were, but she is certain that this is where she is meant to be. And I love Kira's response. Very quickly and panickedly, she replies, "It's the wrong answer, Opaka. You can't stay here."
She would absolutely say that.
Yeah, and the pain in Kira. She wants Opaka to come with them. She doesn't understand why she would want to stay. And Opaka replies that she knew when they came through the wormhole that she wouldn't be returning. And yeah, it's that night. It's that hint of prophecies being self-fulfilling. She didn't intend to return.
No,
she wanted to come to a place and to be involved in resolving some conflict, and she's found that. Whether it was the prophets who brought it to her or her herself who was drawn to it, she's found what she was looking for. And she says that you must tell our people, Kira, that I have answered the call of the prophets. I was brought here because it is time for these people to begin their healing process, just as you were brought here to begin yours. And that is a really nice parallel, as you've said before, between Kira and between the Ennis and the null Ennis.
That's
someone
what they've been building to.
Yeah, someone who is living here, living in a state of constant conflict, even after the immediate threat has gone. And it's how trauma works. It's how our minds respond to having lived in a state of trauma for so long that we cannot stop being vigilant. It's so damn good. Goddamn. We then come back to Dax and O'Brien, and O'Brien is pretty much talking to himself. He swats away, this is what I've written down, he swats away Dax's suggestion that a photon might destroy one of the satellites because the others might swarm up like Veyan horn flies. And that gives him his idea. He gives himself an inspiration. I'm just like, oh, for fuck's sake, man. Come on.
I also found it a little bit clumsy. I made in my notes. I'm surprised that Dax suggested shooting their way in. That does not seem very in character. Oh. So I also thumped on that and thought that wouldn't be. That would not be what I would expect Dax to suggest. If anything, I thought Dax would come in with the Star Trek standard, which is what's the third option? What's the new solution that's creative and original? And again, they give it to Miles, which seems a little bit lazy. So I'm glad we were on
he mentions Veyan horn flies. Which of these two characters is more likely to have experienced alien insects? It's not Miles. That would have been a line naturally to give to Dax.
100%.
Oh yes, if Veyan horn flies notice something, they all fly in the direction of it. We can create a distraction. But no, Miles comes up with it by himself for reasons of either reducing Terry Farrell's workload or
possibly
sexism. Don't know which.
You're being very generous to Terry Farrell here and not leaning on the producers of not giving her enough scope, but sure. We don't know, do we?
One thing Dax does get to do in this scene is she addresses Cisco as Benjamin when he has said only 3 of them will be beaming up.
She does,
that
doesn't she?
Opaka is going to stay on the surface.
Benjamin, can you confirm?
Exactly, yes. And it's nice that they put, I always like it when they put in a note that feels like the character. Bashir coming in with a puppyish, arrogant, stupid takes that no one's going to put up with.
It's their characters. Yeah. You're
Dax relating to Benjamin. She's the only character who calls him Benjamin, which is lovely consistency. So we remember who she is, even if she's been uncharacteristically silent and stupid throughout this episode.
Yeah, that's the point.
Anyway, back on the moon, Shala has overheard the conversation that Cisco is having through his comm badge, and he wanders up to confirm that they're not planning to take, that the crew aren't planning to take the Ennis with them. And Bashir explains that it wouldn't work because the microbes stop working as soon as they leave the planet. And Bashir then steps close to Cisco, and in a lowered voice, he says that while he is dedicated to the preservation of life, he wonders whether they shouldn't try to find a way to help these people, quote, put an end to this torture. He might be able to disable the mechanism in the microbes, meaning that they would stop functioning when someone was killed, and these people might finally be able to die. And at this moment, again, Shala disappoints everybody by approaching, and with urgency, he says to Cisco, "You've seen our life here. Please, it's the only solution left. You give us a way to reprogram these microbes, and we'll put an end to this war. But," it goes on to say, "on this world, Doctor, your disabled microbes will be the ultimate weapon. We can wipe out the null for good. We could finally and truly destroy our enemies." And it's it's just a way of wrapping up the episode. We don't need to feel guilty that these characters have been left here on this moon because their leader, who typifies them in standard Star Trek fashion,
Yeah.
he is too violent. He isn't going to accept peace. So the fact that we can't save them isn't a tragedy. They'll keep killing each other because that's what they have chosen. I dislike that intensely. It doesn't feel real. It feels very constructed as an easy way of leaving them behind.
I can see that, and I would counter that by saying, well, yes, there is a need, obviously, to sadly tie the story off, because Deep Space Nine is not currently an arcing show. It does not have a long running kind of conclusion, so it cannot revisit this story anytime soon. And also, I do feel like that, in a clumsy way, is what the creators, the writers, were going for, which is he would never, Shalal would never want a peaceful solution. I think he wants this. He really wants to achieve it because all he's known his entire eternal, sad, immortal existence is I am fighting the Nollenis.
And then
True
it gives
1984.
Opaka a real reason to stay.
It gives
If he'd
Opaka,
started to have
yes.
his mind changed by the end of the episode, what would she do for the rest of her existence?
And it
Yeah, you're right.
undermines that message of, well, eternal war, constantly fighting it, war based on ideological purposes, where you can't achieve that ideological goal, that conceptual goal, is pointless and futile. That's the message we're trying to get across. So I can see that, although you're right, it does not have the hallmark of a solution that you would think Star Trek would provide.
Yeah,
But
it
the
does.
conclusion,
It still feels messy, but yeah, it isn't necessarily a problem with the story so much as the Federation can't solve every problem. They can't just swoop in and
exactly. They're
save everyone.
They're clumsily working towards that. And you know what? I kind of enjoyed Alexander Siddig's reaction, which is visible, palpable disgust.
He walks away.
He actually audibly.
As soon as Shalal starts saying this could be a weapon, he walks away from it.
And I like that, as always, he's the junior, he's the baby of the crew, but his moral code is therefore very clear and distinct. And he's like, I think that he took a massive leap, which is to go, I am a doctor, I took an oath, protect your life, but actually, this isn't living. And that in itself is clearly an aberration for him. It's a massive aberration for 20th century humanity.
I really like that the writers included that because they skip very quickly from he is conflicted and wants to bring them euthanasia, to bring them the right to die, the dignity and the peace of death.
God.
And from that to
still a taboo.
But that isn't what they want. They're violent and they don't want to have that. It's a very quick pivot, and I do like that they included it. That they had that moment
a taboo subject.
Equivocation on Bashir's part.
Yeah, exactly. We at least managed to skirt close to that topic, which, is still hotly debated these days. Which is, that right to die under your own choice and medium, which is obviously illegal in most Western, most world cultures. There are very rare exceptions. A culture that would allow you to die under your own terms. So
I think there's been a shift in law recently. I think there's been a move against referring to it as I'm about to refer to someone dying by their own hand, committing suicide, because to commit suicide, it's on a linguistic parallel with committing homicide, committing fratricide. The terming of it is a legal terminology. It is what used to be a crime.
But exactly.
Yourself, people were imprisoned for it. I think people are no longer imprisoned for that reason. But obviously, it is still considered a tragedy when it happens. It is taboo. It is forbidden that we take our own lives.
And for somebody like Dr. Bashir, therefore, as a 21st century doctor, but informed by a 20th century audience, death is the ultimate enemy at all costs. Any other concepts are put aside. He's there to preserve life. So in one line, it's given him at least the opportunity to go, this isn't a life that you should preserve. And that is phenomenal. That really took me aside because, I don't recall this episode from my first watch. But
it is a huge concept to introduce very quickly towards the end of it. And it feels sincere. It doesn't feel jammed in there. It feels like the real process that someone like Bashir would go through at that point.
I'm in a moral quandary, and you can imagine, even in the 21st century, where medical technology is far more progressive, and you could solve a lot of diseases that we just have to live with here. He's still saying, you know what? Actually, the ultimate solution is a merciful death. I could possibly word that more diplomatically, but I'm not a Federation officer, so I can't. But yeah, in these dying moments, to float such a very radical concept seems really wild and out there. It's no small thing.
In chat, the Indoor Cat has said it's legalised as a medical procedure here in Portugal, as I believe it is in Sweden.
And I think most infamously Switzerland, I believe.
Oh, I apologise. It's probably Switzerland I'm thinking of.
I'm sure we can correct that in follow-ons, but yeah.
It's at any point in the last few decades, and any point prior to that, it's a very heavy topic to raise, and it's one that they go there, they raise it along with the cruelty and the tortures of war. They raise the idea that a group of people might prefer to die, and and I think I therefore do feel a little bit cheated by the fact that they can neither take them away from the moon nor do these people choose. They don't choose though. It's an easy option for Bashir. They just walk away because the people are not ready yet. But it does, in terms of the mechanics of the plot, it means that Opaka has a reason to stay there. She could have chosen to travel back with them and to die in the process, but instead she has work to do here, so she stays here to do it.
100%. And clearly the intent of the episode, which, it does touch on these kind of difficult concepts, but ultimately is working towards an obvious conclusion, which is this needs to happen. Oh, sorry. Yes, I've referred to the wrong cat there. I do mean the Indoor Cat with the fascinating information there on the European law, and not Captain Cat, my co-pilot. So I do apologise. Wow.
But yes, we're approaching 11 o'clock.
Yes. Let's wrap up.
For those on YouTube, we start at 8 p.m. and we've normally wrapped up by 10 or so, but tonight we've managed to go on so much longer just because we've had so much to bitch about.
It's been so good. It's been so good, but so exhausting.
But yes, there's a moment when Kira says, "Do you really think the fear of death will put an end to the fighting? It never has in any other war." Which is, I'm glad that they included that. They're saying this is a supernatural situation, but actually that isn't an end to it. We're not going to pretend that people being able to step out of it is going to solve the problem, because it never has. O'Brien then calls from the Rio Grande, and Cisco and Kira step to stand with Bashir, who has walked away from the Ennis in disgust. They all stand together facing Opaka to be beamed up. And the Rio Grande launches a probe to entice away one of the satellites, leaving a gap in the net through which the transporter beam can function. And Shalari is shouting at Cisco, saying, "You can't leave without giving us," and Cisco just cuts him off with, "Energize when ready, Chief." And the Ennis then, as before they beamed up, the Ennis starts shouting and leaving the cave, returning to their endless fight, and the crew all turn to face Opaka, and Cisco says, "Opaka, if we ever find a way," and she replies, "My work is here now, Commander, but she actually, in the Wikipedia entry, it sounds as if she said your path and mine will cross again. She actually said your path, P-A-G-H, and mine will cross again." And he just nods solemnly at her, and Kira is blinking away tears, and Opaka smiles stolidly as the crew are beamed up. And then I like the way the episode ends. She turns towards the sound of fighting.
I made the same note.
And it fades to black as she is looking and hearing the sound of it. It's a strong emphasis that she still has work to do there, and her story is ongoing. I like that they didn't end it neatly on, this is a solution.
Exactly.
It's over.
The Enterprise would sail away from a happy world, rescued from its problems by the Federation. Yes. In this situation, we've left a supposedly important character behind, basically trapped on a world beset with eternal war, with no easy solution in sight. And there's no, we've noticed a few times, and I've always really objected to, like that kind of ending on a gag. a funny line
Everyone
like,
laughs just after someone's been summarily executed.
exactly, right,
Exactly.
exactly.
Going to live in infamy. But yeah, but
Oh
here
God,
they
that grinds
don't
my
do
gears.
that. They really do
On this
emphasize we're
occasion.
leaving the Kai behind, and she's got some very difficult work to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, I like the tone of that. I like that
do.
lack of resolution.
This is
It
it.
feels more real, and it feels as if it leads into more DS9, where Kira is still living with the conflict,
She
and we're
absolutely
going to
is.
keep living it with her.
The only other thing I would have said is, now that we've lost the Kai, what the hell does that mean for Beidra? The only thing holding them together was a really tenuous provisional government and the Kai. We've
And
heard it
now the
mentioned.
Deep Space Nine crew are responsible for the Kai being taken away from Beijing. That's not good for diplomatic relations.
It's dreadful. It's
Oh
the
my
worst thing
goodness.
ever. I think with classic Star Trek misdirection, they probably won't touch on it if my recollection is great. They'll just be like, well, that was a
Oh
bit
no, it's
bad.
a tragedy for everyone that the Kai went missing during a day trip, which Cisco agreed to.
Meanwhile, what's going on with another member of the main cast, and we'll just brush that off. So I don't think that season one is brilliant with dealing with the fallout from this, if I recall correctly. But we shall have to see in future
But
episodes.
I liked seeing Kai Opaka come back. It was nice that they hadn't forgotten her, and it's
Yes.
nice that she had an ending which was in fitting with her prophecy, and that she had important work to do. It wasn't a messianic ending. She didn't die, and she didn't martyr herself for her
No.
people, which would have been a very pat ending for her. She's instead continuing to do the work, and yeah, just on a personal level, I appreciate it when people who espouse a religion do the work of trying to better the lives of others, and she very much does that. I think she remains a very admirable person to anyone who's watching her.
I think that's an excellent thing to take away, and I would also like to say that this is not the last time we've seen that ethos employed. It's other Bajorans, but they will also take responsibility for thinking that their religion is not just the glue that holds the society together or a cultural observation, it's actually a credo to live by. So it's not the last time we have touched on the real world impact of a religious kind of doctrine. So we have that to look forward to. We have officially passed 3 hours, which I think is the longest we've spent ever on an episode, Kat.
I
So
think we've also drunk more wine than we ever have during
Oh my god, I think so.
Space Wine.
Oh my god, I really think so. I'm super tired. So I'm going to ask you, Kat, for any thoughts that we have not yet covered that we can put to film.
I don't think so. I was looking for a quote from the episode, and because it's not a comedy episode,
No.
it's not an episode where I don't think that any particular statement from a character is more impactful than the way that they make their statements. I think the acting is fantastic. It does feel like a relatively formulaic Star Trek episode in some ways,
Yeah, 100%.
but the way that it interacts with the characters and who they are, Bashir, Kira, and Cisco, I think that redeems it. And it's an enjoyable episode. It's so much fucking better than last week's. Oh my god. The direction is there. The whole way the stage is set up. This episode, I feel, had all of the attention on it, which last week's lacked.
Yes, I did. I know that last week had a lot of money spent on it. So did this episode as well. It did have a
But you
lot
can
of money.
see it in this episode.
Precisely, the production, the sets, the guest staff, as stingy as they were with the guest characters. Yeah, it is clear they spent a lot of time and money on that. I think what DS9 has done is it's taken a staple Star Trek episode, a warring situation, our characters in the middle, and used it to build character. And we keep coming back to this, but that's what makes a good DS9 episode: is develop character, develop the world, the culture they're in.
And it meets the themes that we've already come across: themes of trauma, themes of what living with war does to a person. Yeah, it just feels so fitting with Deep Space Nine. The bits of Deep Space Nine that I know and love, it matches those, it brings those back, it works with them well, and it progresses. I think that most of the characters didn't see much progress in this episode. Kira certainly did.
Yeah.
Her character has been moved forward by this. Which is nice to see, because so many episodic shows have people go through unimaginable things and then they don't remember them by next week.
I can't.
The death of not the death, but the leaving behind of Opaka, and what Kira learned on that planet, I think are going to stay with her and inform who she is as a person going forward. fingers crossed.
I do think so. I think that Deep Space Nine cannot guarantee will always do that. I'm not going to say any more, but it's always been a bit uneven with how it approaches this serialized storytelling because it is still breaking away from that episodic storytelling. It's not. It's one of the first shows that ever introduces arcing storylines, and it struggles with it a bit. And sometimes it's brilliant.
They didn't have a J. Michael Straczynski who plotted out the entirety of it right from the
If
beginning.
we could only combine their powers, what a magical show that would have been. But no. So if I say that this, yeah, I've said it before, we will cover a lot of the concepts again in more detail in a really mature and adult way, and I'm really looking forward to your impression of those. But I think we have had here a really good episode. You know, nothing revolutionary, just good, comprehensive, hard-working character building, good structure, just a good episode, a good, solid all-rounder.
Good direction, just good camera work.
Yes.
Everything working together in symphony the way that it does during a good episode of Deep Space Nine.
I absolutely agree. And on that note, I think we should let everyone, including ourselves, go because there's been 3 hours of which I don't feel I can cut more than about 5 or 10.
Thank you so much to the Indoor Cat for moderating the chat throughout this. Thank you to Nigel if you're still here with us in the chat. I'm fairly sure Nigel will still be alive.
And we shall return the next time we have gathered energy and time to watch the very next episode of
next episode of Deep Space Nine.
100%. Yes. We're all looking forward to it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Kat. And we wish everyone to live long and prosper. Take care and see you again.